Welcome to 13 Days of Hallowtober.
Hey folks, Rigor here. Before we begin today's video, I just wanted to correct an erroneous statement that I made at the beginning of it. I referred to this as our first podcast video, and that fact is incorrect. This is actually our second podcast video. Chris Esper and I did one a while back where we talked about the fact that he was coming on board as full-time. We talked about our Patreon and our TeePublic and all that fun stuff. So I apologize for any inconvenience. Those responsible for the sacking have been sacked. Thank you. Hello and welcome to another episode of Storage Jaws. I'm your host. What? When? Oh, tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start again. Hello and welcome to not only the 13th episode of Then Is Now's 2021 13 Days of Hallowtober, but also Then Is Now's first video podcast. I'm your host, Rigor. Now, before we begin, I'd like to quickly remind listeners and viewers to visit our website at havenpodcasts.com, where you can find not only this show, but our other show, The East Meets the West, and you'll find our links to our TeePublic and Patreon page. And on Patreon, there's another show that we do that you can't find anywhere else. So we highly recommend you check that out, along with all the other goodies there. Again, havenpodcast.com. Okay, so last year, 13 Days of Hallowtober examined what are widely regarded as the scariest movies of all time. This year, our theme was modern zombie films, and that is not the voodoo films like White Zombie or I Walked with a Zombie, you know, the Bela Lugosi ones from before 1968. No, these are the ones that came after and were inspired by or kind of influenced George Romero's were influenced by George Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 68. And so for those of you brave listeners who've been with us every step of the way on these 13 days, I would like to thank you for joining us. And today is going to be a fun episode because today we are going to have a roundtable discussion about the six zombie films of the late, great George Romero: Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead. So class is officially in session. And joining me today is a group of horror movie and zombie film experts and enthusiasts. I'd like to name you guys off one at a time, and then you can give a wave to the folks at home, okay?
All right.
Awesome. So first up, we have Mr. Bill Van Ryn, who is the publisher of Drive-In Asylum Fanzine, which is an amazing magazine. Hi, Bill.
Well, thank you. I think so.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Also with us is Jim Harberson, who's the author of A Disgusting Supermarket of Death. Welcome to the show again, Jim.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us once again, Joe, I think the last time you were here was our last Hallowtober. Maybe we did one in between. I think, didn't we do like Invaders from Mars and a couple?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Filmmaker Joe Lemieux. Thanks for coming back and joining us.
It's great to be here again.
Awesome. I'm so glad you guys are here. So we're going to start this off with a question that I have for everyone, and then we'll kind of go into each film. Now, today, I don't expect us to do a full deep dive like we would do in an entire episode since we have 6 films to cover. But, you know, the conversation could go all over the place. It could go anywhere. We may go on tangents. So, you know, you people at home, you might want to just get your pillow and blanket and your popcorn and snuggle up for a fun time. So the first question that I have for the group is, and Joe, I'm going to direct this one to you first. When was the first time that you became aware of George Romero or his zombie films, or what was the first film that introduced you to his body of work?
I believe it was Night of the Living Dead. I remember it played on like Channel 38, I think. I'm not sure.
Oh,
It
yeah,
wasn't played on
it did.
wasn't played in Creature Feature at all.
No, Creature Double Feature never played in Boston.
Yeah, no. It was like on some other station, either WPIX maybe, which is 68. Was it 68?
No, 68 was I forget the call letters for that, but that was out in Western Mass. PIX was Channel 11 from New York, and that had Chiller, and WOR had Fright Night on, I think, Friday nights. I used to watch those when we first had cable. So it might very well have been on that.
Yeah, I just remember seeing it and it scared the crap out of me. So, because it was black and white, but it also, because I remember seeing in school when they used to show us the Nazi concentration camps documentary photo, like were black and white, so this almost felt kind of documentary style and almost kind of real.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
I hear you. Jim, how about you?
Well, technically, I think that the first time I saw it was the first Romero film that I saw was the snippet in, what is it, either Halloween or Halloween 2, John Carpenter's films from 78 and 81. It's playing in the background.
Hmm.
I didn't actually see the whole thing until I think 1986. Before that, though, I kind of fell in love with Romero because of Creepshow, which is one of my favorite horror films. But when I saw Night of the Living Dead for the first time, it kind of blew my mind, but it also literally made me puke the next
Wow.
day. All I could think of was that scene where the zombies are eating the young couple whose truck has exploded because of the gasoline mishap, and they show them with that creepy, almost underwater organ music, and they're, like the intestines. They're going to town on the dead. It's like a barbecue, and I just couldn't get that vision of the intestines going into the people's mouths out of my head, and barf.
That's hilarious. Bill?
Well, I was into horror movies ever since I was a really young kid, and I was really lucky because my aunt and uncle got me this book called Horror Films by Alan Frank, and it was like the Bible to me. And they wrote a lot about Night of the Living Dead in that book, and I still had never seen it until one night my mom and a friend of hers decided we were going to go to a local park because they were showing movies in the park. And the movie they were showing that night was Night of the Living Dead. And I think I was I think it was 1977. So I was about 7 years old. And wow. I mean, I don't know who decided that they were going to show Night of the Living Dead in a park, but I would love to thank that person. And I owe my life to that person, maybe. I was horrified by that movie. It was just, I knew what to expect, but I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how disturbing and brutal it was going to be. I mean, I was a kid, so I saw the intestines, like Jim mentioned that. I mean, that really stuck with me. To me, that was the pinnacle of the film, and was seeing guts, because you didn't see that in very many movies, at least movies that I saw. And yeah, that pretty much changed my life. Like I was horrified, but I liked the feeling of being horrified by it.
Yeah, I've told this story on the show before. The first movie I recall vividly seeing in 1972, I was 2 years old in the back of my parents' car, and we saw the movie Asylum with Peter Cushing and Herbert Lom. It was one of those Amicus anthology films. And there's a scene in the film, of course, this is a bit of a tangent, but there's a scene in the film where this woman's husband has been chopped up into pieces, and the body parts are all individually wrapped in like brown meat wrapping paper, and they start to move and go at her. And I will never forget that scene. That terrified me. And for years, my mother and I couldn't remember the name of the film, so we called it Chopping Heads. So, who wouldn't want to pay to see a movie called Chopping Heads with Peter Cushing?
That's a better title.
Yeah. So anyways,
Rabid weasels.
yeah, there you go. So that's where I started with horror movies. And I don't recall when I first saw Night of the Living Dead, but I knew I had heard about Dawn of the Dead on the playground from other kids, and their relatives had seen it. And I think, Joe, I think you're right. I think we saw it like on late night TV, perhaps over the cable in the early 80s. So I would have been in my early teens at that point.
It wasn't like it was like either like a UHF type channel, I guess.
Oh, maybe it was. Yeah. I'll do some digging in my TV guides when I get a chance eventually, and see if I can find when that was. But yeah, I think the first one, though, for me was I had rented Dawn of the Dead in high school, and that sort of opened up. I had been reading about Romero, I think either through Famous Monsters or Fangoria, and because I remember being excited that Day of the Dead was coming out in '85. So I had already been a fan at that point, but I don't really remember when the first time I saw a Romero film was. So let's get into the first one that we've been talking about, the Night of the Living Dead. The plot of the film follows Ben and Barbara Cole and 5 others who are trapped in a rural farmhouse in Pennsylvania and attempt to survive the night while the house is being attacked by mysteriously reanimated corpses known as ghouls or zombies. So, this movie is the granddaddy of the modern zombie film. It's kind of set up the ground rules for zombies in the modern era. And in Romero's world, it's either if you die, you come back, or if you're bitten by one of the zombies, you come back. They're slow shamblers. They're not fast moving zombies. And the only way to kill them is to destroy the brain, usually a headshot with a gun. I think fire can destroy them too. But it's considered one of the best of Romero's 6 films. Do any of you disagree with that statement? Do you have one that you like better?
I think it's one of the best horror movies and maybe one of the best movies ever made, and certainly the best of Romero's zombie canon.
I consider it like one of the 5 groundbreaking films that changed cinema forever. It's up there with Bonnie and Clyde, Easy Rider, 2001, and The Graduate. I mean, it forever changed cinema, the way people looked at cinema.
Yeah, there's really no way to overestimate the influence that Night of the Living Dead had, because even if the movies that came after it weren't about zombies per se, they did have that. I think Night brought that brutal edge, the documentary style that we were talking about before. That Night is one of the first things that I would think of that brings that to films. But that said, I wouldn't say that it's my favorite of his movies. I think I like Dawn a lot more, because Dawn really sort of took that vision and expanded on it almost impossibly, because Romero did that movie on such a small budget. I don't want to get too far into Dawn, but I think Dawn I like a little bit better than Night. But it's hard to compare the two because they're both brilliant for different reasons, and 2 of the best movies that he ever did.
Absolutely. What I think is one of the funniest things about the release of Night of the Living Dead is that when they first came out, and I think this was only in the Pittsburgh area, they released it on kiddie matinee shows, and the kids were, yeah, and they're watching the movie, they're thinking, oh yeah, this is great, and they're talking, and then all of a sudden, this is one of the reports, is they stop talking. And then they get to the part, like you guys mentioned, where the zombies are eating people, and some of them were like crying. And it was.
I think you're referring to Roger Ebert's review of the movie.
Maybe
he mentions that in his review. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I don't remember that ever playing in kiddie matinees, but it did play on TV right around the time that Dawn came out. That was the second time I saw Night. And there's a local horror host here named Bill Cardill, legendary man.
Chili Billy.
Yes, yep. Chili Billy himself. And he's in the movie, obviously. But he showed Night of the Living Dead as sort of like a promotional thing for Dawn. And he had George Romero on, I believe. And during every commercial break, there was a TV spot for Dawn of the Dead. So that night blew my mind.
That's right, yeah.
That's awesome.
I've seen it on YouTube, so.
That's so cool. Yeah, because I had Judith O'Day on the show. Judith O'Day on the show a few episodes back. And I mentioned to her about when it premiered at the Kiddie Matinees. She said she didn't hear about it at the time, but she did hear about it like a year or 2 later. And she wasn't really, she didn't really have a grasp of what the movie, as the movie was catching hold and building up steam. She was sort of, it was a job. She did it, and then she was focused on doing other things. And it wasn't until years later that she really realized how immense this movie would eventually become. Yeah. And Dwayne
Jones movie for so long. It was a midnight movie even after its original release, and there really wasn't such a thing until maybe like the early 70s. when they really started to catch. Reefer Madness was another one. They showed Reefer Madness at midnight a lot, like in college towns, where people were most likely to be stoned and wanted to go out to a movie at midnight, and that's how Night came back. I mean, they showed that at a lot of midnight matinees, and it caught on. It became a cult thing.
So the same could be said for Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. No one knew the impact it would have on audiences until once it was out there.
Right,
well, I
right.
think part of the power. Sorry, let me just finish my thought. There's a primal quality to these films that, because they're low budget, it's like the Blair Witch Project. It's believable. There aren't really any special effects to speak of, and the ones there are entirely believable. And it's not like you have a bunch of beautiful actors reciting lines that are beautifully crafted. It's just a gut punch, and one that you can imagine. It's almost like they've reached a point where the willing suspension of disbelief isn't necessary. And that's why one of the reasons it's so effective.
Yeah, Romero, one of the brilliant things about Romero is he never overreached when he made those films. He made them on all the early ones anyway. He made them on really low budgets, but he didn't attempt things that would look completely ridiculous. Everything that he did, he was able to make very believable. And a lot of people might have attempted something a little more ridiculous than he did, but he just kept it really simple with, there was a little bit of blood, there was some guts, and just the whole concept is what made it so disturbing more than anything else.
Oh, and the claustrophobic atmosphere of the film, being trapped in a house, and especially with, putting all these different personalities in the house together in a life or death situation. It's almost like a social experiment, like that Twilight Zone episode where, what was the one, Maple Street, where the aliens cut the power on the neighborhood and
the monsters are doing Maple Street.
That's right. Yeah. It's almost like a social experiment like that, just to see, in terms of the film itself, crafting the film to see how would real people respond in a ridiculously horrific situation like this, I think.
Like the Squid Game.
Oh, yeah.
It reminds me of the Squid Game. The lifeboat ethics, game theory, all this. And it's terribly deconstructive, because the hero is African American, and the second most important protagonist is female. And that's obviously deconstructive, and the ending underscores that. But it's like you said, it's like taking a bunch of normal people and pitting them against an unimaginable horror and seeing how that spins out depending on the personality of each player.
It's kind of similar to Frank Darabant's The Mist. The people in the supermarket are the real monsters. The creatures outside are just who they are.
Yeah.
To a degree.
That's true. And one thing about this film, and at least Bill, you made me think of this talking about it being on the midnight circuit, is that I think around this time, late 60s, early 70s, is when the spook shows were dying out. And those usually went around midnight, where you had the magician and he would do like these 3D gory shows, almost like the Grand Guignol. And then they'd play a movie. And then a guy in a monster costume would run out in the audience and grab a girl and carry her away, stuff like that. And those had been going on since like the 30s and 40s. And by the late 60s to early 70s, they started to die out. And I think this sort of thing, like you said, Reefer Madness, this Texas Chainsaw, then even Rocky Horror Picture Show sort of replaced that experience of, rather than it being a theatrical and a film experience, it was just a film experience, but it was terrifying nonetheless, So one other thing too about Romero's films is that, especially like in this one, he's always got some kind of social subtext in there. And Bill, you referenced the fact that the main character was African-American. And I know Romero's on record as saying he didn't actually do that on purpose. He literally, Dwayne Jones was the best actor for the role, so he picked him. But I think it's kind of taken a life on its own and shown that, by showing or portraying a strong Black protagonist, whether Romero intended or not. I think it paved the way for, especially I think for a lot of, to start off with the blaxploitation cinema that we saw shortly after this movie, and then, you know, fully coming into the mainstream as time went on. Do you guys agree?
Yeah. Now there's a movie I wish I could have seen, Dolomite Against the Living Dead.
It should have happened, but it didn't.
Man.
I think it was Jim that mentioned about having a hero that was African American, but I think that it's important to remember that when this film came out, you know, America was a much different place, and this was the late '60s. You know, there was political turmoil, the civil rights issues that were going on at the time. I mean, it's kind of probably hard for us to imagine what it was like at the time to see this movie and to be so taken aback by the fact that, you know, there was this, they just treated Ben like he was any other character, and there was no special reference made to his race in the film, which was really
he's a strong character.
Yeah, exactly. Like he was the one that you thought was going to live. And, you know, Romero being a terrible cynic killed everybody in the film.
What's kind of sad too, and strange, I heard that Romero said they drove the film canvases to New York to find this distribution company. And it was the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated.
Right.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Plus,
Does
if you think about it,
okay.
I just wanted to add one more thing. I love the idea of the assault on the family farm. You know, the family farm was sort of the apex of cultural definition for the longest time in the United States. And I think, who is the writer? Crevecoeur, who idolized the family farm in the 18th century, a French writer, kind of anticipating Democracy in America by de Tocqueville. Anyway, but this is a full-on sort of destruction of the myth or the iconographic nature of the self-sufficient family farm. That maybe all of the horrors, the ghosts of the horrors of the American past are coming back to destroy maybe the focal point of American self-definition.
The family unit itself is under attack in the film because, you know, there's the moment where the little girl comes back to life and she basically kills her mother and father. Well, her father was almost already dead, but she eats him. And then she doesn't even eat the mother. She just kills her and just leaves her there.
Right.
Which is really kind of like.
Also Johnny comes back too.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that too. So it was like your own family members. We're gonna murder you in this movie.
Just like Christianity, when Jesus says, "I've come to drive a stake, but to pit brother against brother," right? Because you either are with me or against me. You're a Christian or you're not, and the family relationship is irrelevant.
And the depiction of the one family in this, which is Ben Cooper, and not Ben Cooper, was that his name? No, Ben was Dwayne Jones, right?
It was Harry Cooper. And
the wife and the daughter, they're all dysfunctional. You know, the only traditional family unit portrayed in this movie, and they're completely dysfunctional. You know, he's overbearing. The wife is kind of subservient and doesn't really like him. He's not likable at all. The daughter, we really don't get to see much until, like you said, where she kills the parents.
Which makes her one of the best characters.
She hurts.
Yeah. So final thoughts on the original Night of the Living Dead. What do you guys think? Should people go out and see this? Should they start with this one, I would imagine?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely start with it.
It should already be the cornerstone of your existence, Night of the Living Dead. We owe all of our horror fandom to Night of the Living, our modern
cornerstone, gravestone.
Exactly. Which, by the way, last April, I had the good fortune. My wife and I went out to Pennsylvania. There was a drive-in theater that was having movie marathons on Friday and Saturday, and so we went to the Evans City graveyard, this Evans City Cemetery, and we saw, we watched the movie the night before, so I could figure out where the characters were of Barbara and her brother. at the beginning, and we got pictures there. I did a couple of videos from there, and it was amazing to see it. It was pretty wild to just
Find
be.
the Kramer gravestone.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one.
What
Yeah.
are the selfie ethics for a cemetery? I'm wondering.
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that.
That
I was wondering
cemetery
the
is
other day, what are the selfie ethics for a funeral? I'm sort of like, this is banging around in my head. I'm like, maybe I should never do a selfie. I don't know. The person's dead. He doesn't care.
so many people have taken pictures in that cemetery. It's been desecrated already. So there's nothing you could do that would be worse.
I wonder if anybody's crashed their car into a tree just to get the same replica.
Oh God. That's funny. I did post on the show notes of that one. I did post, or I might have done it as a blog, pictures. I did side by side comparisons from the movie and from the picture that I took at the graveyard. Try to emulate that. But yeah, it was pretty wild. Actually, I think who was the guy that played Johnny was also one of the producers on it. And of course, I don't have his name in front of me.
Russell Striner.
Yep. I think either him or his family put up the money or raised the money to reconstruct the little chapel that's there, because it was about to fall apart, and it looks awesome now. And they actually use it for functions.
Yeah, there was a whole fundraiser. I have the T-shirt. Save the chapel.
There you go.
And
that's right. You're from that area,
yeah.
I heard that some people got like pieces of the old chapel before they reconstructed it too. So,
like Jim Morrison's grave.
Jeez.
Get a
it's
little
even better than that.
Yeah.
It's like Catholic reliquaries, right? People want little iconographic pieces of the things that they love. So they'll take little fragments. What is it? Memento moris.
Yes.
things that they love. And
I was wondering, I was thinking about getting a piece of the Berlin Wall once, and it's like, how do I know it's real?
yeah, I mean, come on. Yeah, how would you ever know?
Well, it's like when you could order, you know, from the back of Fangoria, you could get the necklace that was a little glass coffin with real dirt from Pennsylvania.
Totally real, man.
Yeah, someone in one of the backyard scooped it up and mailed it to you.
What a brilliant scheme that is. And the locket that it came in looked so nice in the end. And what you actually got was like a little cruddy little thing that looked like it came out of the gumball machine.
Right. This is totally on a tangent.
That to one of those.
Go ahead.
Wear it to one of those speed dating things, and you'll meet the right person eventually.
There you go.
Depends on what you mean by right. There is one more thing I wanted to say about Night before we move on. I don't know if you were ready to move on yet.
No, I had a tangent I was going to go in. So
I think it's really interesting that I mean, I'm one of the people that talks about Night so lovingly, you know, and it's much deserved. But there is a tendency to overestimate parts of the film too. And one of the things that happened that really amuses me is how, if you go online and look at the message boards, you know, IMDb doesn't have them anymore, but you can find people discussing this online frequently about how Night of the Living Dead doesn't give any explanation for the zombies, which is totally not true. There is an explanation for the zombies in it, and it's a Venus space probe fell to Earth. And there's a mysterious radiation in the area where the zombies are coming back to life. So, you know, I mean, that's what they meant to be the reason for the zombies to come back. Because why else would you have it in the movie? I mean, why would you put a coincidental happening like that?
They mention it on the radio in the car, and then later on they're talking to the generals in front of the Capitol, which they did guerrilla style. They just put flags on some car in front of the Capitol and shot guerrilla style, which you couldn't even do today.
You know, I had heard years ago that Romero was pissed that whenever they would release it in TV Guide, every so often the description would be about that, the Venus space probe, you know, a space probe brings back radiation that causes the dead to come to life. And I heard that he was mad at that he threw that in there, but he wanted the origin to be not known. It could be, you know, it could have been anything. You know
It
what I
seems
mean?
to me, if you wanted the origin to be not known, you wouldn't have put something in there about a space probe falling right there with a whole bunch of mysterious radiation.
I
Well,
suppose.
you know that if you follow the logic of Return of the Living Dead from 1985, that's all a snow job. And what really caused it was the 2,4,5 trioxin marijuana spray that happened to, revive dead veterans. So thank you, the war on drugs, for, the zombie apocalypse.
Well, wasn't the original title for Night of the Living Dead called Night of Anubis?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, can you tell the audience about why Night of the Living Dead lost the copyright as well?
Because the original title was Night of the Flesh Eaters, I think, was what they registered it under. With that's what they filed their copyright under, and then they decided to change the title to Night of the Living Dead, and nobody changed the copyright, and nobody put it on the film. So it slipped into the public domain, and basically you could show Night of the Living Dead and not pay anybody any royalties. And you could even, like when the VHS boom happened in the late 80s and early 90s, like everyone had Night of the Living Dead out on VHS because you didn't have to pay anyone.
It actually appears on the TV in my latest movie that won an award at the Sharm el-Sheikh Film Festival, Veil of Blood. Watching Night of the Living Dead.
That's right. That's awesome.
There's a reason for that, right?
Sorry, George.
That's awesome. And speaking of, Return of the Living Dead, John Russo, who co-wrote Return of the Living Dead, or he wrote it, right? I don't know if he co-wrote.
I thought it was the guy who wrote Alien, the director,
Dan O'Bannon.
Dan O'Bannon and John Russo.
That's right.
Worked on it together.
He wasn't attached to it, but I think it's very loosely attached to it, I guess, somehow. I don't know.
John Russo wrote a sequel to Night of the Living Dead called Return of the Living Dead, a novel. It had nothing to do with the plot of what we know to be Return of the Living Dead now, but he optioned it. And so he got a story credit for having written it. And, I think he did work on a draft of the script, but then Dan O'Bannon stepped in too. So it was kind of like a shared thing.
Right. So that was our discussion of Night of the Living Dead. Now let's move on to Dawn of the Dead in 1978. And I'll just read the synopsis here. Following the scenario set up in Night of the Living Dead, the United States and possibly the entire world has been devastated by a phenomenon which reanimates recently deceased human beings as flesh-eating zombies. Despite efforts by the U.S. government and local civil authorities to control the situation, society has effectively collapsed, and the remaining survivors seek refuge. Protagonists Roger and Peter, two former SWAT members, join with Stephen and Francine, a helicopter pilot, and his girlfriend, planning on leaving the city and take refuge in an enclosed shopping mall, only to be destroyed when a motorcycle gang shows up and allows the zombies into the building. So, Jim, first thoughts on Dawn of the Dead?
Well, let me preface this by saying I haven't seen it in a long time because it's not streaming, and I ordered a DVD copy. I'm waiting for it to arrive. But based on my recollection, who's the guy who's the special effects guy? Doesn't he play the famous
Tom
one?
Savini.
Tom Savini,
Yeah, he was Sex Machine in Dawn of the Dead, I think.
No,
And
Dusk to Dawn.
No,
Yeah.
that's right. And I think he's one of the motorcycle gang members.
Yep.
Blades.
And I love the premise of this one.
His character name in the movie is Blades.
Yeah. I love the premise of this one because it really is a kind of full-on assault of the capitalist paradigm. It's like when hell is full, the dead will go shopping. I mean, the dead wandering the shopping mall don't look that much different than living people do wandering the shopping mall. They're sort of in this, covetous haze. And, it's a rumination on kind of the meaningless of the acquisitive existence. And, that what do you do, right? What do you do when the world's coming to an end and material scarcity for you has been it's a problem that's basically been solved because you live in this magnificent 20th century treasure chest. And so what do? You slowly drive yourself insane. And
It's like
I
today.
think, yeah.
I'm glad you said it.
So those, I watched the Zack Snyder remake, which has many great qualities too, but I prefer the Romero one. Especially, there's this wonderful scene near the beginning where this TV studio is under assault by the dead, and some guy just gets torn in half, and his guts get pulled out. They start eating him. I don't think I'm confusing this with Day of the Dead. Maybe I am, but
I think you're getting little bits and pieces of the series in there, but that's great.
they all sort of blur together after a while, So I'm trying not to be indiscriminate, though, or I'm trying to be discriminate.
Well, I just remember even as a kid being blown away by that whole opening sequence that took place, and you're just watching the breakdown of society happen on live TV. I just love that, with the people arguing and screaming at each other.
Well, that's what Dawn of the Dead is really about. I mean, that's why it's frightening. The zombies, they're just monsters they're obstacles for the characters in the film. But the real problem is that there is no more society. There is no more safety. These safety nets that we have in place have all collapsed. The government can't control it. The local police can't control it. Nothing is going to stop this from overtaking us, and that's what's truly frightening.
I did like the SWAT team going after the into the low income housing thing, which is totally gruesome. And then they start looking at each other. So it's like, why are we doing this? Or why are we fighting for this? What's the whole goal of us doing this? Like, let's have to question their morality as they're out there killing zombies or whatnot.
Shades of the Vietnam conflict.
Yeah.
It was also brilliant because it allowed Romero to get something in there to show people who were living in poor conditions, like people that were living very humbly and struggling, and they didn't have nice surroundings. And then all of a sudden later in the film, you've got these main characters who are living in luxury while the rest of the world burns. So that helped get his point across, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. And it's funny too, because that whole scene just makes me think of the fact. Now we've been doing right along zombie films leading up to today, and a common theme, and you'll see this again in Romero's last zombie film, is what happens in that apartment building at the beginning of Dawn, where people still don't quite understand what's happened to their loved ones, and they don't want to see them get killed because they don't quite necessarily understand that these people are dead. Almost like, we as a species have a very difficult time of letting someone go. And if someone dies and then you bury them, they're gone. You have to wrap your brain around that. You go through all the stages of grief. But if someone dies and comes back, that's a little difficult to wrap your brain around. So you can see how some people would sort of break down. And I found that, like I said, across many movies, that's a common theme, not necessarily a full-on plot, but it's definitely a common subplot that we run across. Would you guys agree?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so. I mean, at least for the characters in the movie. So
yeah,
I think that, I'm not sure it's really a theme in Day. I mean,
no.
Laurie Cardeal's lover gets bitten, but she amputates his arm to protect him. And I think it is a theme in Diary of the Dead because the characters there are in the midst of the outbreak, and
well, I meant across other non-Romero films. I should have been more clear. We've seen that in other films, but yeah, we'll get to that because in Survival too.
Resident Evil Apocalypse, the priory where the Anglican priest is keeping his sister and feeding her. That's probably the epitome of what you're talking about.
It became a zombie movie cliche, really. And I took that to mean it was more that they saw something that worked in Romero's movie and they were like, well, let's do that too. There's a loved one that's dead now, and the people that are surviving don't want to admit that they're dead, and the new zombie is going to claim other family members. I think that just...
And don't forget the end of Shaun of the Dead, which might be the best
Right.
portrayal of this phenomenon. You know, he's dead. He wants to eat me, but we can still play Nintendo or PlayStation or whatever.
Yeah, I wondered why he hung on to the best friend, but he didn't keep his mother. After
Right.
she turned zombie.
That's
That was a jerk. She married him.
yeah. Oh yeah, Bill Nighy's character, Philip. You kill Philip, head to the Winchester, and wait for it to all blow over. You know, and it's funny too because I think in the
I gotta go.
Okay, Joe. Well, awesome. Real quick, give a plug to the zombie film you're working on.
Mike Neal and I are working on a period piece zombie-like film that takes place during the Revolutionary War with 2 actors. It's a short. It's called The War Orchid. We start shooting in November. So.
Nice. Awesome. We'll keep us posted.
I could be up at 5 a.m. tomorrow. So.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, Joe. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Joe.
All right. Take care.
Happy Halloween.
You too.
Right. Bye-bye.
Also in the TV show The Strain, we saw, wasn't there one of the characters? I can't remember if one character kept his mother in the apartment or was the other way around. The mother kept a kid, not a little kid, but a grown kid in the apartment, even though they had been turned into whatever the vampire creatures they were. I don't know if you guys watch The Strain at all.
I don't watch that. No.
No, but there's something like that in Return of the Living Dead, in which the guy who works at the Unita medical supply warehouse is, zombifying, and his girlfriend doesn't want to leave him, so they're locked in the chapel together, and he dies, and he says, "I want your brains."
Yeah.
And they actually repeat that to greater comic effect in Return of the Living Dead Part 2, where they're together, I think, in a church, and she says, "What do you want me to do?" And he says, "I want to eat your brains." And she says, "Okay,"
Well, the TV show The Walking Dead did a lot of it too. I mean, they used almost everything that Romero used in his movies, but one of the characters was the governor kept his zombified daughter in a closet, or he had her locked up somewhere, and he would bring her out and like play with her even though she was a zombie.
Well, also
uplifting TV.
I can't remember. Well, there's Maggie, the film, the zombie film with Schwarzenegger that came out recently about the guy whose daughter is doomed to zombify, and he's trying to do the best he can to keep her around as long as possible. But I can't believe I didn't think of this before. Fido,
Yep.
The domestication of zombies, and the best is the former ZomCon employee who has like the pedophile relationship or the ephebophile relationship with the dead cheerleader zombie or whatever.
Right. That's so true. By the way, Bill, I have to say, I really like your Italian horror film lighting there.
Thanks. Mario Bava came to my house and set it up.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's very Bava-esque. That's awesome.
It was the moment that shaped my life.
Nice. I gotta say though, with Dawn of the Dead, I remember being on the playground and this kid telling me that his cousin had seen the movie. He's like, "Oh, my cousin went and saw Dawn of the Dead the other night. This person blew this guy's head off, and there was zombies were eating people." And he was just going on and on about it. And it was one of those things like back in '78, I guess I was 8 years old. So it was like I knew that the movie existed. I maybe even saw it in the paper at the, we talk about newspaper ads before. But I also was afraid of it. Even though I loved horror movies, I was terrified of everything as a kid. I'm still scared watching them. But I remember knowing that it was a dark movie. It was probably really gory, and it was more for adults. But that someday I would like it. And, just a few short years later in my teens, like I said, was able to rent it. But when we did rent it, I had another buddy sleep over my house, and we got into an argument because we weren't sure which character was Peter and which character was Roger. And my friend's name was Peter, and of course my name's Roger. So we were arguing. We both wanted to be Ken Foree's character. We're like, no, he's Peter. No, he's Roger.
Sorry to break it to you, but your character turned into a zombie.
I know, yeah.
Dawn of the Dead actually didn't come out in the United States until '79.
Okay.
It came out in Italy first because Dario Argento put up some of the money to do it. And you know, he had the rights to do his own cut and to release the cut in you know, Europe. So, and then Romero had rights to do whatever he wanted with the American release. And it came out here in I think it was April of '79.
Okay.
And ironically, one of the first places that it played, at least in our area, was the theater right at the Monroeville Mall.
Oh, wow.
Because that was my mall. I mean, even before the movie was made, I had been going to Monroeville Mall for years, and it was exciting that they're like, oh, they made a movie there, and it's a scary movie. But then when I finally saw it, it was really bizarre because I knew the mall so well, and everything in the movie I can tell you, like, oh yeah, I remember that weird ice skating rink. Like, why was there an ice skating rink in the mall?
Right.
And that strange clock with all the things that opened up. I mean, that was one of my favorite things about going to Monroeville Mall, was seeing that. And it really did seem like a paradise. Like there wasn't anything like it that I had ever seen before as a kid. And I just couldn't believe there were all these plants inside, and like there was all those water fountains and a little bridge that went over it. It was a magical place.
Oh yeah, yeah. And this movie, you know, it predicts the mall culture, and it, you know, while simultaneously satirizing consumerism, because the malls were pretty much starting to pop up all over the place around that time. And you know, like you had said earlier, Bill, I think was you know, the zombies, or maybe it was, I forget which one you said it, but someone said the zombies are walking around like shoppers, you know, in the same way that shoppers wander around with the glazed look over your face, especially around Christmas time, not knowing what to buy, you know.
It also reminds me of, there was this really sort of, I don't know how to describe it, 70s dystopia aesthetic in this mall where they filmed a lot of Logan's Run. And I guess it was like a brand new mall in Houston, Texas, or Dallas, Texas. And, you know, it looks kind of space age, filtered through maybe a bad trip. I don't know, but it's really interesting because, you know, it's there are some places, maybe not the Monroeville Mall, but I mean, I don't like shopping malls. I don't like the lighting. I don't like the crowded conditions. But some places just lend themselves to horror, even if they're designed to attract people and keep them inside, like casinos.
Right.
And, you know, maybe it's because I don't like crowds. I don't like being enclosed, but still, I mean, this is another example of Romero targeting maybe the new apex of the American experience, the shopping mall, as opposed to the family farm, where we're trading self-sufficiency for other, you know, having to buy stuff from other people to have to live, and hitting it spot on in the nose.
I
Oh
get
yeah.
the impression that Romero arrived at the shopping mall setting just sort of by chance. I don't know if he planned it out as intricately as we think he did, like looking at it after the fact. I think somebody made a remark, or he was there. He had a friend who showed him the back part of the mall, like all the secret places in the mall. And he said, boy, wouldn't it be interesting if, you know, if people hid out in the mall and lived after there was some kind of catastrophe, like this would be the place that you would come to live. And I think that was sort of like the germination of that seed that he had for Dawn of the Dead. And but yeah, it really was sort of like the perfect place to do a story like that. And one of the most brilliant things about Dawn of the Dead is how he managed to exploit that location. They didn't pay anything for that, I don't think.
Really?
To do that movie. That, I mean, I don't really know, but it wasn't, certainly not like if you did a movie in a mall. You couldn't do that today. You would
Right.
owe so many people so much money to film. Like all of those businesses that are glimpsed in the film, you know, there would probably be some rights issues everywhere. And he was able to pull that off for just, you know, a fraction of what you would have thought it cost. And he had a helicopter. Like there were just people that chipped in on all this stuff, and they were like, hey, they knew people that had a helicopter, and they were like, okay, well, can we use the helicopter? So he pulled it off for very little money compared to what you get on screen.
Interesting. How do you know how long they were able to be in the mall and shoot? Because I would imagine, they would have to have done it at night after everything was closed.
Yes. Well, I think they filmed in the mall for maybe like 6 weeks. And there was something about it was getting to be close to Christmas time when they shot it, and they had to get it done before the mall decorated for Christmas, because then they would have had to have taken all the decorations down and put them back up again in time for the next business day, because they filmed at night. They filmed overnight.
That would have made it even better, a Christmas zombie
a missed
extravaganza.
opportunity, for sure. A missed opportunity. It would have been another stab at American culture, as our obsession with Christmas, and to get that into the movie.
And the consumerism that goes with Christmas. There's just so many things to love about this movie, though, and the effects are so good. Of course, Tom Savini effects, although it's funny to watch it. When you watch it nowadays, you kind of forget until you see it again that it sort of has that bright red Hammer-esque kind of blood, like they used to use in the Hammer films, where it almost looks like paint. And did this get an X rating when it first came out? Do you know?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm not even sure if they submitted it for an X rating. I'm sure they did, but they certainly did not expect to get an R rating, and they decided to release it without a rating so that it wouldn't be labeled as porn.
Right.
Because the X was a curse. It still is. It's really hard to make an NC-17 film even and have it be widely accepted. So, but the blood really pissed Tom Savini off, because he and I've heard him say this in so many documentaries about Dawn of the Dead that I watched, that he wasn't really sure how that mixture of blood was going to photograph. And when he saw it, he was really angry because it didn't look realistic. But George Romero loved it, and he said it fit in perfectly with the comic book tone that he wanted for the movie, so he left it, much to Savini's chagrin.
Oh, interesting. It didn't he also want
shopping mall blood?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But didn't Romero also say at one point that he wanted it that way, sort of to lessen the blow, so it wasn't as horrific as it could have been? Or is that internet?
I'm sure, yeah, because there was a lot of funny stuff that he did with that violence, which was horrific on its face, but it's just so over the top and so grand guignol, that he just went for it and made it a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, like the guy getting the top of his head taken off by the rotor blades of the helicopter.
It's like the old EC horror comics too. I mean, just ridiculously over the top, and so ridiculously over the top, it kind of neutralizes the horrific nature of the violence.
Right.
You can't take it seriously.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to look at the cast for a little bit here. One thing I wanted to point out, because I've always thought this now, David MG, is that how you pronounce it? MG, who played Stephen Flyboy Andrews. He always looked like Hugh Laurie to me. And I knew who Hugh Laurie was back then because of Blackadder and all the British comedies that he was in. But even watching it now, am I the only one here that thinks that?
I'm seeing it. Now I'm not going to be able to unsee it.
Right. Oh, man. And of course, the great Ken Foree, who played Peter Washington, man, he was awesome. When my grandfather said, when the hell is, what was it? When hell overflows, the dead will walk the earth. When there's no more
room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
Doesn't he play the apocalyptic cleric or reverend in the remake of Dawn of the Dead in 2004 who says that?
Yeah.
And he also plays the trucker Michael Myers murders in the bathroom stall in
Grizzly Joe.
Yeah.
In the Halloween remake. Yeah. That was he's just great. I think he even showed up on General Hospital. He's just so awesome. He can do anything. We had Scott Reiniger, who played Roger, and Galen Ross, who played Francine. I don't really know much about anything else these two were in. Do you guys know?
Well, Galen Ross, there's really only one other horror movie that she was well known for, and that was Madman.
Oh, right. Okay.
Well, no, wait, I'm getting it mixed up. I think it's Madman.
Or Maniac. Yeah.
No, it's not Maniac. But she did the movie under a pseudonym, Alexis Dubin. Now, see, I'm gonna have to look it up because it's gonna bother me. Now, I'm not sure that it's Mad Men. I'm about 99% sure, but I do know she used the pseudonym Alexis Dubin because it turned out that this movie was not. It's Mad Men, yes.
Okay.
It was not a union production, and she was a member of the Screen Actors Guild. So she did it under an alternate name. And don't ever take anything related to Madman to a convention. It's just, occasionally she does conventions. Don't ever take her anything for Madman because she'll get really angry at you, and she definitely won't sign it.
Why is that? She didn't like how the movie came out, or?
No, she's a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and she did a non-union production. That's a big no-no.
Right. But
And
everybody
plus
knows it.
she's a very well-known maker of documentaries now, and she's won awards for the documentaries. So she's, I know she likes talking about Dawn of the Dead. She's not, too skittish about talking about Dawn of the Dead, but anything on Madman she will not talk about.
Huh.
Well, here's something interesting. Most horror movies, and this has been a rule, I think, since their inception, most of the talent in the horror movies are nobodies. Not nobodies in terms of they're not good actors, but nobody's heard of them. Except, there's like the marquee actor for the creature, let's say. But everybody else is kind of, most of the time, it's like new, debut actors or people who most people haven't heard of. And I think that, there's a practical reason for that. It helps cut costs, and the people going to horror films don't really care about star power. But I also think that there's a fringe benefit to that, which is the more star power you have in a horror movie, the less believable it becomes, and therefore the less scary it becomes.
Exactly. You want that feeling that you don't know these people, and that these could be anybody. These people could be you or your neighbors or your friends or whoever. It could happen to you.
Right. Although I thought Brad Pitt worked in World War Z. I thought I was able to identify with him as a father and a husband. And, it's like you want to project yourself onto that and think that you could be as, heroic as he was. But yeah, I see what you're saying. But also don't forget too, especially back then, a lot of newer actors, they wanted the work. So they would take whatever they could get. If it was a crappy horror film, they did it because it was a paying gig, and then Ken Foree was a nobody. And then that movie put him on the map, Dawn of the Dead. And then, now he's a cult star,
Big name horror movies are often cash-ins. Like nobody's going to be talking about World War Z 30 years from now. I barely even talk about it. And I'd forgotten about it till you brought it up.
So final thoughts on Dawn of the Dead, Bill.
Just an absolutely stunning film. It's rough around the edges because it was not a big budget film, but I think based on what is actually in the film, it's pretty amazing that Romero managed to make this. And I mean, let's face it, he really started it with Night of the Living Dead, but Dawn pushed it into the stratosphere. And it didn't, even after Dawn, you didn't see the kind of zombie movies that you see now, or the zombies being such a fixture in pop culture. It had to germinate there for a while. And then eventually the tentacles started to spread, and these modern filmmakers went back to Dawn, I think, mostly more than anything else to get inspiration.
Oh, absolutely. Jim?
I'll pick up on what you said about modern filmmakers. My one my major objection to most zombie films, and it's, you know, it's not an attack on their quality or execution. It's one of the premises I dislike is this idea that civilization will collapse so quickly. You know, I think that that's a convenient plot device to tell the story of a, you know, people want to tell the story of a band of survivors in an apocalyptic wasteland, blah, 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 blah. I've always thought it was more interesting to have a kind of like Fear the Walking Dead, the first few episodes of that, in which you had this quiet run up to the apocalypse. And the military tries to intervene and protect people. There's this wonderful comic created by this guy named Brian Pulido, Chaos Comics, named Evil Ernie. And there are a series of stories related to Evil Ernie in which the dead have beset the world, but the military is, with some efficacy, taking them out. And kind of like the impasse reached by ZomCon and the zombies in Fido, or the impasse sort of reached by the military and the zombies in 28 Weeks Later. But that's not much of an impasse. It's more like, well, the zombies have just died off. And I think that it's, in many ways, it's a more interesting story to me, the process story of how do we manage a zombie apocalypse, you know? So every hospital is like ground zero potentially. And I think that Romero got away with it in Dawn of the Dead and did a really great job. But after that, I don't know, and I understand there are budgetary constraints, but I'd really love to see people go in a direction where there's the process management of a zombie apocalypse, right? Like a procedural, a crime series procedural, right?
You want to see
They
how
sorta-
people would get it under control?
Right. They sort of do that in the Dead Rising movies, but it quickly descends into the apocalypse and people running from the apocalypse. But I think I'd love to see somebody do a, you know, gee, there's an impending apocalypse. No, people aren't sure what's going on, or maybe people figure out what's going on and they try to react to it in a constructive way. So cynical as I may be, I don't think that civilization is going to collapse like it did in The Living Dead in 30 days. I don't think that. I think that's kind of absurd, actually. I understand it as a.
I don't think they ever actually gave a time frame, and I think that's one of the strengths about those movies is they don't really lay it all out, and he kind of plays loosely with the timeline of when these things were happening. You know, so there could have been a length of time that he didn't document in these films where it looked like we might get the problem under control. That would be interesting to see a movie like that, like sort of like a placeholder somewhere in between night and dawn.
Yeah.
I don't think he did that with either Diary of the Dead or well, I don't want to get too far ahead.
Right.
Talk about that one.
Well, and you know what's funny? To your point, Jim, before COVID, my wife and I watched however many seasons there were, the first 2 or 3 seasons of The Handmaid's Tale. And I'm watching it. I don't know if you're familiar with the storyline or not. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm trying to figure out the timeline. I'm like, how far into the future is this? And it really wasn't that far. And I found it very hard to believe that society could have changed that drastically almost overnight, to the point where like the main character has a daughter and the daughter's like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. And she hasn't really aged all that much by the time she sees her again. So, but then COVID hit and we're literally sitting on the couch now, both on furlough from work. And I'm like, oh shit, I guess society can kind of change almost overnight. You know, it just seemed like that. Everything was different, you know?
And the response to COVID from a lot of government entities was a little lacking, dare I say. So it is kind of easy to see how something could fall apart really easily. I mean, a disease is one thing, but you know, it's a fanciful situation in Romero's movies because it happens quickly. As soon as they bite you, you're going to die and you're going to become one of them. But you know, it's not that unrealistic. I don't think so anyway.
I thought
I'm just thinking in terms of the firepower that people have, that a shambling zombie apocalypse would be, once you got, you know, things organized, it wouldn't be that hard to put down. The real question would be, how do you manage it going forward? And that's sort of what Fido is about, ZomCon.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to see a zombie apocalypse up here in Maine because pretty much all of us have guns up here.
But I mean, would it be enough? I think the idea of the zombies is the sheer numbers of the zombies out there. And would you be able to keep from shooting each other with the guns instead of shooting the zombies? Right. That was Romero's point, you know, is like the zombies are just sort of like something bad that happened, but then the real problem happens with the people who are living. And then you're going to be battling people that are just as heavily armed as you.
Right,
so
right.
That's the problem with getting in there, and it allows them to grow in their masses.
And we kind of do see that in some of the upcoming movies we're about to talk about. So yeah, so did you guys gave your final thoughts on Dawn of the Dead, right? Recommend it?
I am not going to promise to not talk about it for the rest of the show, but yes, I would definitely recommend it.
I meant to just wrap up that one segment, but yeah, absolutely. We could jump all over the place. Just trying to keep a little structure here. So, and that being said, let's jump into Day of the Dead from 1985. And as I had mentioned, I knew this was coming out. I must have read about it in Fangoria. And I'm going to read the synopsis here. Sometime after the events of Dawn of the Dead, zombies have overrun the world, and an underground army missile bunker near the Everglades holds part of a military-supported scientific team assigned to study the zombie phenomenon in the hopes of finding a way of stopping or reversing the process. Dwindling supplies, loss of communication with the other survivor enclaves, and an apparent lack of progress in the experiments have already caused loss of cohesion among the scientists and soldiers. Dr. Logan, the lead scientist on the project, has been secretly using the recently deceased soldiers in his experiments, trying to prove his theory that the zombies can eventually be domesticated. So did any of you guys see this in the theater?
I didn't.
I wasn't old enough to see it in the theater. Any of the originals. I had to wait till it was on VHS and then rent it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it played around me. I couldn't seem to find. I did find some newspaper articles and ads when it was out, but I don't think I saw this one in the theater. I do remember renting it though, and I loved it. I was terrified. That opening scene where the girl's looking at the calendar and the arms come through the wall, that scared the crap out of me. I thought, what a way to set the stage for the rest of this movie, you know?
The stellar moment.
Oh my God. So Jim, what was your first experience with Day of the Dead?
I honestly don't remember exactly when I saw it for the first time. I mean, I've watched it repeatedly since then, but I guess that what I really like about it is Dr. Logan. And I was saying this before, he reminds me a lot of Dr. Herbert West, played by Jeffrey Combs in Reanimator and Bride of Reanimator, with his, to quote his hapless assistant doctor, morbid doodling with dead body parts. And you know, I think that this is one of the films where Romero is starting to, his hatred of the human race is starting to distort his ability to tell a story. And it's very, the characters that are supposed to be likable are really two-dimensional, and most of the other characters are unlikable. That's why I glom on to Dr. Logan. He's the only really interesting doctor, and in some ways the most humane, even as he's doing these horrible things with the dead. And there are a lot of really interesting ideas in the films, like the films going forward. I mean, there are all kinds of cool ideas about what you can do with zombies. But I guess I still would recommend people see it. But you know, the hateful nature of so many of the characters, begins to grate on me, because not that it's not necessarily believable, but because it just begins to feel like the other movies where malevolent actors push people who are already, with frayed nerves into a very bad place. And so it's like, I've seen this movie before, literally. And it starts, at this point, I think that Romero's films start to disintegrate into the same story again and again, the same characters again and again. And the only interesting part is the novelty with which zombies kill or are killed. Maybe that's too harsh, but I think after Dawn of the Dead, it starts to lose its oomph and its novelty.
Well, Day of the Dead was sort of a disappointment as far as the production for George Romero, because he wanted to make a movie that was more like Land of the Dead, which followed many years after the fact, I might add. So Land was more like his original vision for Day. And if you've ever read the script is available online, that you can go read his original treatment for Day of the Dead. And he had the budget to do it. And then he sat down with one of the suits and they said, like, we want you to make the movie rated R. And he was like, huh? I can't make a rated R movie. I can't do what I want to do and make a rated R movie. And they said, well, we'll still give you the money, but we're only going to give you half of the budget. Oh. So he had his budget slashed right out from under him, and he had to radically revise the script. So he basically just overhauled the whole thing and turned it into the movie that we know of. He took it back to basics, which was people trapped with each other with very unlikable characters in a small space. What's going to happen? It's the pressure cooker thing that he did in the first film.
Right. I just rewatched it last night, and like I said, I saw it on VHS when it came out. I bought it. I still have the VHS, and I think back then I watched it quite a few times, and I may have seen it once between the late 80s and the early 90s and now, but I really didn't remember a whole heck of a lot of it. I remembered like key scenes, like the guy getting his arm cut off and stuff like that. But I walked away from it this time thinking that this movie is extremely underrated. I got a lot more out of it as an adult. I got a lot more of the psychology of what the characters were going through. You've got Rhodes, who's put in charge now because the guy before him died. They don't really say how. And he's coming unhinged. And then you've got, Dr. Logan, who they refer to as Frankenstein, and he's a little off balance too. And then, the Spanish guy is kind of knuckling under the stress, and the girl sees this and she's trying to prevent something bad from happening and trying to tell everyone, no, he's not fit. He needs to rest. And so I got a lot more out of it this time. I liked that whole, what do you call it? Like a pressure cooker. Like these guys were all in this pressure cooker, and it was just building and building until it finally just explodes. So I have to say, I always liked it, but I never really thought much about it. And I always thought it was weak, but walking away from it this time, I kind of have a higher opinion of the film.
It's a little histrionic. The people are screaming at each other almost the entire time. The drama is cranked way up, and it's a little uneven in that regard. But the thing that really grounds this movie for me is Laurie Cardill's performance. I think she's really brilliant in it, and now this came out around the same time as Aliens. It was 1985, and or was
Aliens was 86.
So it came out even before Aliens then. But I mean, it was still like within like that
Ripley.
A year of each other. Yeah, and she really sort of went there first. Linda Hamilton was a year before her in 84 in The Terminator.
Right.
But even Linda Hamilton's character in that movie was not like Sarah's, because you really see her in a lot of situations that you didn't normally see women in, unless you count like the blaxploitation films of the 70s and the female action heroes. She really met that head on, and she also added a very human element to the character as well. That scene where she has to amputate Miguel's arm after he's been bitten. You know, you watch this woman and she chases a man through tunnels, bashes him over the head with a rock until he's unconscious, takes out a machete and cuts his arm off, then gets a torch and cauterizes the bloody stump. And then she's immediately confronted by hostile soldiers who are aiming machine guns at her. And they're going to kill this man who is her lover. And she gets between him and the machine guns. And she just stares them down. And she talks them down from the ledge. And they walk away. And then she just like collapses and starts sobbing.
Right.
That was like really intense for me in a good way.
Yeah.
She's the moral center of the film, and she's the only three-dimensional character, I think.
Yeah,
except for maybe Bub. Bub kind of is a three-dimensional character by the end too, because he's developed a sense of sarcasm.
And the movie makes you empathize with a zombie. I mean, that's a difficult task.
Romero played with those. He played with characters. A lot of his characters were two-dimensional, especially in the zombie movies that he did. But you're right. There always was like one or two characters that was a little deeper than the others. In this film, it was Sarah. I met Laurie was in Drive-In Asylum issue number 15, and I interviewed her for that.
Oh, nice.
And also, we also had Terry Alexander and John Harrison from the film as well. John Harrison did the soundtrack. And Terry Alexander was, of course, the helicopter pilot in Day of the Dead. And I met Laurie at a convention, and I never really get starstruck by people, but when I saw her, I just froze. I was like, oh my God, it's Sarah. and I just totally became like intimidated by her, but she's really nice and she's very approachable. A joy to talk to, and I was so excited to have her in the magazine because Day of the Dead was really important to me, I have to say. I didn't think it was a terrible movie the first time I saw it, and I still don't. A lot of people say that it's one of the worst, and I don't agree. I think it's not the movie it should have been, but it's very strong what it is.
Well, and now that oh, sorry, go ahead, Jim.
I just wanted to add one more thing about two-dimensionality of horror characters, which is this. I don't have a problem with two-dimensional characters in a horror movie or any other kind of speculative fiction movie, because the point isn't characterization and evolution necessarily. Yes. It's about people pitted against a common enemy or solving a common problem. And I always think it's interesting when you see these movies where the screenwriters sort of jerry rig or jam this character development arc in. It's like, well, the world is there's a a zombie apocalypse. This might be the perfect time to work out my issues with my father. Stuff like that. It's like, really? This is what we're going to talk about? No, I think it's absurd, and it's almost like a point for comedy. So as long as the characters are entertaining, which, for example, they are in Return of the Living Dead, that's all I ask, right? I mean, I don't watch science fiction movies or horror movies by and large for character development, because it's like, who cares? I mean, occasionally people hit it out of the park, like The Exorcist, but outside of that, it's like, imagine if, I'm trying to, I haven't seen them in a long time, but imagine trying to make the Feast trilogy about character development, It's like, really? Well,
the characters don't know they're in a movie. Don't ever forget that, because the characters don't know they're in a horror movie. So, they really do think that they're going to die. And that's probably a natural instinct. If you know you're going to die, you're going to talk to people and address things. And Romero, he went there. He went there in some of the Dawn of or Living Dead films that he did. I don't know. I thought I thought he was good at maintaining a balance, I guess.
And now the fact, Bill, that you mentioned that this was originally supposed to be the land of the dead, it makes me understand now, because there's a couple of firsts in this movie. The first of the firsts is her cutting off Miguel's limb to stop the spread of the zombie virus, or whatever it is, to stop the infection spread. And what's funny is, like I said, I hadn't seen this for probably a couple decades. I always assumed it worked. I forgot about the ultimate fate of this guy. So when I watched it again, I was shocked. We never find out if that worked or not. But it's the first instance, at least in the Romero films, as far as I could tell, and probably in most zombie movies in those decades, where someone tried that to stop it. And I just remember, even as a teenager, thinking that was brilliant for her to do that.
Well, she was a scientist, and she had apparently been working with this disease or whatever it was. She had been studying this phenomenon. So I thought the implication is that she had seen that before, that at some point in the past someone had managed to stop the transformation by severing a limb. And if they could get it in time, she's like, I think I got it. I got it in time. And she's like, if I didn't, I'll kill him myself.
Right.
So apparently there was a precedent, that we didn't see on screen, obviously, but as her character, was hoping for this to occur. So I think she'd seen it before.
And that's an instrumental scene in World War Z, where Brad Pitt amputates the infected arm of the Israeli soldier. Yeah. And then it's like, hang on, he asks the stewardess, I think he does it on the plane, right? It's like, give me some vodka, and you're just going to have to tough out this, impromptu amputation.
And what's great, and now on this series, me and a couple other co-hosts, we actually did talk about World War Z, and the brilliance of that scene was set up at the beginning, because the little girl had a teddy bear or something that did a sort of a 12 count, or counted to 12. And at the same time, he sees someone get bit, and the countdown's going off, and all the other sun in the background goes down except for the doll counting. And he sees that it takes 12 seconds from bite to transformation. So when he cuts her hand off, he counts to 12, ready to kill her or, destroy her brain if that happens. And then she doesn't. So that's at that moment that he kind of realizes, okay, it takes 12 seconds, but you can, like you said, you can chop the limb off. And because the bite, I guess, is so far away from the major arteries that it works. Like if you get bit in the throat, forget it, you're toast. But bit in the hand or the forearm, there might be a chance. So there's another first in this movie also, which is of course, we mentioned Bub, the learning zombie. I thought I remembered Bub. I mean, that's one of the most iconic things from this movie. And I forgot about the whole part where he picks up the gun at the end and walks through and faces off against Rhodes, which, again, I thought that was brilliant. And just to, not only are you now empathizing with the character, you're hoping he kills Rhodes.
Yeah. It's sort of that I Am Legend thing, which was a big influence on George Romero, the novel I Am Legend, written by Richard Matheson. And, the hero of that story was a human being who suddenly found him in a society that was made up of vampires. And so he wasn't the one that should have lived anymore. Like now there was this new reality for the population of Earth, and he was now the outsider, and he was the monster. So I thought that was interesting that Romero did that with that character of Bub. That like now, like it's a zombie with a gun and trying to kill a human character, and we're totally on his side.
Right, exactly. And a lot of other movies that have portrayed zombies, sort of using the Romero rules, the zombies aren't quite able to evolve the way Romero zombies seem to be able to do.
Send more paramedics.
Yes, and more cops. All right, well, you get that one. But yeah, and the effects in this movie, man, I think it was Savini again, right?
Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah, that was Tom Savini, and yeah, the effects in it are so gruesome and over the top, and yet very realistic. Not like Dawn of the Dead at all. There's no more day glow blood.
Right. Right. And one thing about this movie too, and I actually wanted to bring up something about Dawn. Um, this movie and somewhat like the beginning of Dawn of the Dead to me had that Italian horror film feel. This movie more so all the way through. There was just some kind of quality about it that had that feel. I'm sure Dawn had that because of Dario Argento's involvement. But this one, like even with the score, which sounded like a Goblin, but it wasn't Goblin, right?
For Day?
For Day, yeah.
No, John Harrison did the soundtrack for it, and a local Pittsburgh band called Modern Man recorded. There's actually a theme song. I don't know if they actually play it over the end credits.
Yes, it's an actual song. Yeah.
That's a local Pittsburgh band that was called Modern Man.
Oh, okay.
Spency Marcellano. I'm not sure if I got his last name right, but he was the singer from Modern Man. Not Goblin.
No, but it had that Goblin feel to it, though, at least at the beginning. Thought the music was very creepy. So the social subtext in this movie, what would you say it is? What would you guys say? I'm thinking maybe anti-military.
I think it's more about what is the nature of civilization and to what extent is mankind capable of civilization. At least I was reading the Wikipedia article about this, and that's what one critic said. And I think that that's spot on. I mean, the doctor himself, Dr. Logan asks, what separates us from them? Because the psychopathic soldiers behave as badly in many ways, maybe worse because they have free will than, compared to the zombies. And the zombies are, unless they've been educated out of their worst instincts like Bob, they're just, they've chosen to respond to a terrible situation by being as terrible as it is.
Right.
And so I think that the social cultural concerns take a back seat to the philosophical, as this reviewer was saying, question of, what is man and what is he capable of, good and bad?
Right. And the quote, I have the quote here that Logan says, he says, civil behavior is what distinguishes us from the lower forms. It's what enables us to communicate, to go about things in an orderly fashion without attacking each other like beasts in the wild. Civility must be rewarded, Captain. So, yeah, but of course, he's rewarding Bub with human flesh.
It's the only thing that could have served as a reward.
Right.
Bub didn't want anything else. He was fine except for the flesh.
And I thought that was ironic because the whole point was to get them to not eat human flesh.
Well, I think it's like the old idea of human sacrifice, vouchsafing the safety of the whatever civilization, if you want to call it that, is engaged in it, right? It's like if we give the external threat to our civilization what it wants, it won't bother us, at least till next year when we have to do it again.
so let's get back to this here. I wanted to ask actually, Bill, Lori Cardille, is she related to Chili Billy?
It's his daughter.
Oh, okay. I had a feeling there was a relation there.
Yeah. George and Bill were, of course, friends, and George saw her in a play in New York, and that was sort of her audition for Day of the Dead, even though she didn't know it. And he offered it to her. So it was great that she ended up doing that movie, because it kind of like kept the series in the family. It's still tied to Pittsburgh in some way, even though the sets for Day of the Dead really are nondescript. It was filmed in an area near Pittsburgh, but you wouldn't know it because there's
in the mine, right?
Yeah.
The mine scenes, the underground scenes, I think were filmed in Pennsylvania, because I don't understand how they thought. I didn't find it believable that there would be this massive underground complex in the Everglades. I mean, how do you build something like that without it being flooded continually?
Oh yeah, because they were in Florida in the beginning. They never really say how far they were though from that area that they flew into. But yeah, there aren't many places that you could have a facility like that.
Right. That's true. I just want to quickly run through the cast here. We'll get on to the next movie. So Joseph Pilato, who played Rhodes, the one interesting fact I found about him was that he was born in East Boston, which is where my father grew up. So I thought that was kind of cool. I thought he did a good job as Rhodes. He's just increasingly mentally unhinged. Let's see. We've got Terry Alexander was John Flyboy. I liked him, and I think him and Lori Cardille and maybe one or two other people from different movies are going to be showing up in what's called Night of the Living Dead 2. But I couldn't find a whole heck of a lot of information about it, but I did find some, which we'll talk about towards the end of the show. Richard Liberty, of course, puts on a great performance as Dr. Dr. Matthew Frankenstein Logan, because the others, I thought they were calling him Frankenstein behind his back, but then that one scientist said it right to his face. He's like, "Look, Frankenstein, blah 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 blah."
I'm calling the shots here, Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And he's always covered with blood in every scene. He never changes his clothes,
Doesn't care.
Well, you could see, like, at first he's just so focused on getting to what he believes is the logical next step to trying to stop this whole thing. But then there's a moment, though, when he's having that civility conversation with Rhodes where you can see it in his eyes. Like up to that point, you think, all right, maybe he's got something here. And then no, he's gone. He's just totally unhinged.
Which is a brilliant irony, because they use the point at which he's discussing civility to disclose his utter madness.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought of it that way. Sherman Howard played Bub, and we've got Gary Howard Clark and a few other people that I don't really know who they are. Now, the supposed sequels to this movie,
Greg Nicotero's in it.
That's right.
Nicotero is one of the Army guys. He was one of Tom Savini's apprentices at the time.
And now he's on. He works on Walking Dead, and he's done a zillion things in between those. George Romero played the zombie with a scarf in this, which I was looking for him last night when I watched it, and I didn't see him. And then, so the sequels, supposedly, Day of the Dead 2, Contagion in 2005. Do you guys see this one at all?
Is this the one with Ving Rhames?
No, that's the remake in 2008.
Okay.
No, there was a Day of the Dead sequel that had Ving Rhames in it, and
really?
It was I don't know.
And Mina Suvari as well.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
Whatever.
It's more like a rage virus thing. It doesn't. It's not logically in keeping with the continuity. It doesn't follow Day of the Dead, the original. It's just, I think that for marketing purposes, they just said, "Oh, it's Day of the Dead too,"
Right. Sort of
a
like
very Italian thing to do, an Italian cinema from the 80s thing to do, to make a movie and pass it off as a fake sequel to a movie that's already there.
Well, and actually, we didn't actually talk about that with Dawn. Do you want to talk about how it was titled in Italy and all that stuff, Bill?
Yeah, it was called Zombie. Dario Argento's cut of the film was called Zombie, and at the time, there was no kind of rule or law that said that you couldn't make a movie using a title from another movie in Italy. So Lucio Fulci made a movie called Zombie 2, which in this country is the movie we know as Zombie. But that was actually marketed as a loose sequel to Dawn of the Dead in Italy, and it was titled Zombie 2. And there were other, there's a crazy list of movies that followed that are supposedly also in the same series as Dawn of the Dead, which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
Right.
How could there be such a thing as all these fake sequels to one movie?
Right.
Staggering.
Just want to touch upon the Day of the Dead remake in 2008. I think Jim, you had mentioned that you liked it. I liked it. I'm not a huge fan of remakes. It obviously is not as good as the original, but I thought it was decent. They changed the zombies to fast moving zombies, so the whole movie had more of a breakneck pace. I was disappointed though that they didn't really tackle the mall aspect of it in the same way that the first one did, and I really think that's sort of a vital plot point to the original movie. I mean, what do you guys think?
Was it called Day of the Dead 2 or Dawn of the Dead 2?
I apologize.
Day of the Dead
I
2.
misspoke. I was talking about the Dawn of the Dead remake. So we'll skip what I just said and we'll edit that out. No, there is a Day of the Dead remake in 2008, and I have not seen that one. There's Day of the Dead 2 Contagion in 2005, Day of the Dead 2008, which is the remake, Day of the Dead Bloodline from 2017. And apparently there was a TV series on the Sci-Fi Channel called Day of the Dead. And I didn't even heard of that till I was doing
I'm
research.
not even sure that's come out yet. I think that's pending.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So let's move on to Land of the Dead from 2005. What's funny is they said this now it's all coming together for me, especially Bill. Now that you said that Day of the Dead was originally supposed to be Land, around the time after Day of the Dead was released, I don't know, a year or two, maybe more, I remember hearing, maybe reading in Fangoria, I'm not 100% sure, but the next film was going to be called Twilight of the Dead. And that title is listed as an alternate title for Land of the Dead. So is that the connection here?
Yes. And there's another funny thing about that title, Twilight of the Dead. When Fulci's movie, The Gates of Hell, it's called City of the Living Dead in Italy, but it came out in the States as Gates of Hell. Originally, the company that put it out is called Motion Picture Marketing, MPM. They titled it Twilight of the Dead. And Richard Rubinstein and George Romero sued them to take that title off the movie. Yeah, it was, I guess people could refer to Land of the Dead as Twilight of the Dead. That might have been an early title on the draft, the draft of the script, but ultimately they went with the title Land of the Dead.
So the plot of Land of the Dead is years after the events of the previous film, which was Day of the Dead, many of the living have fled to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where a feudal-like government has taken hold. Paul Kaufman, played by Dennis Hopper, rules the city with overwhelming firepower. Big Daddy, an unusually intelligent zombie, directs his fellow zombies to use firearms against the human defenses and later leads the zombies in an assault on the human city. Hold on. Now, that description is totally erroneous. But Big Daddy does lead an assault of zombies on the human city, with the result, the electric fence that keeps the zombies out. It now keeps the humans trapped inside. I should have reread that before I did this. It basically, the humans have walled themselves in, but now they're basically prisoners inside this thing. Did either of you see this in the theater?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
I did not.
I saw it. It opened in Pittsburgh, and I went to see it. It was at the Fulton, what was previously known as the Fulton Theater. It's now known as the Byam Theater, and the world premiere of Land of the Dead was there. And yeah, it was sort of a letdown for me personally, because I like I said, I was really pumped about seeing it because it was the movie that Day of the Dead should have been but wasn't. And what I feel it's a lot of the same ideas that we got in the first couple of movies, just sort of recycled. Very well done. I do like that movie, but I don't think he showed us very much in that movie that we hadn't already seen.
Jim?
I think that I tend to agree. It feels like he's recycling. Or I heard this wonderful biting comment once when I was in grad school of it was of an English academic, and it said, "Oh, he's writing his book again." Like he'd written this book and now he was just basically moving the parts around and writing another book that was the same book as before. And that's what this movie feels like. But there are, like I said, there are parts of it that I love. Like Dennis Hopper is the best part of the movie as far as I'm concerned. Because he's just, there's something about Dennis Hopper. I remember when Meet the Fockers. Was it Meet the Fockers? What was the film that came out before that? I can't remember. But this critic observed that Robert De Niro, even when he does non-violent dramas, brings a kind of threatening gravitas from his other roles to whatever he does. And Dennis Hopper's the same way. And you can't, for example, if you've seen Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet, with the performance of Roy Orbison and the mask, and you can't help but think of that when you see him as this autocratic leader of Fiddler's Green. And so, I think that his parts were underwritten. Actually, they could have had a lot more fun with that as basically pimping out this luxury prison to all of these rich people. Though I'm still not sure why money would matter in a post-apocalyptic world.
That was hard to get past. Yeah, like why did they need money? I didn't understand that part.
We see that in all three of all of the last three films too.
So I enjoyed parts of it, but it's one of those things where the parts are more interesting than their sum. And I really love, for example, the cheerleader zombie whose jaw's been ripped away or something. There are little flashes of genius. And I really like Asia Argento in it too.
Oh yeah.
Dario Argento's daughter. But by and large, it just feels like it's a series of frustrations. Like, oh, this is a great idea. Why didn't you follow through with it? So I don't know. I let's put it this way. If you're a zombie movie fan, you absolutely have to see it. If you're a Romero fan, yeah, go see it. But as a standalone horror film, I'm not so sold.
Interesting. Now I saw this in the theater too. I think I ended up going by myself. 2005. So my kids were real little. So my wife probably was like, just go. I have to say, I'm taking the opposite stance. I love this movie. And in fact, I watched it again recently and I really, really enjoyed this. Now, walking into it the first time in the theater, I didn't know anything about the fact that it was supposed to have been Day of the Dead. And I'd forgotten most of what happened in Day of the Dead. So like the whole concept of the zombies starting to learn, I totally that just was out of my head. So I was like, oh, that's great. So then watching them now in succession, to me, it just seemed like the next logical progression. Like maybe the events of Day of the Dead and the events of Land of the Dead are almost happening simultaneously, where, Bub is regaining some intelligence and now Big Daddy was doing that. So my brain tries to connect it that way in terms of it's happening across the board. And now we're just seeing a different milieu, if you will. I like the concept of, again, it's not quite as claustrophobic, but when you really think about it, like you said, it's a luxury prison. So it still has this element of claustrophobia to it. I walked away from it the first time thinking I really enjoyed the high production value. I mean, that's got to be the highest budget he's ever had up to that point. and I love the cast. I didn't know who Simon Baker was at the time. I knew who Asia Argento was. I like the guy that played Charlie, and of course, as you said, Dennis Hopper. I mean, any movie with Dennis Hopper in it gets points in my book. But like, there's this scene where Riley's friend Charlie, which I like that dynamic too. So he's got this friend Charlie who, the side of his face is burned, and we learned that basically Riley rescued him from the zombies. And so now they're basically pals. Charlie kind of looks out for him, but Riley also looks out for Charlie. They sort of have this brotherly relationship. And there's a scene where there was this little guy who had screwed Riley out of his car. He had supposedly purchased a car. And
yeah,
they're in this place where all hell breaks loose, and the zombies and stuff, people running and screaming, and the little midget guy's running. And this is the first time you see Charlie really in action, and he pulls his rifle out, he licks his finger, he wipes the sight at the end of it, and then just everything in the background starts to go quiet. It doesn't go silent, but it goes real quiet, and we're following his action as he's aiming at the little guy, and then boom, nails him in the head, like right through under the bleachers or something. That scene to me was brilliant. I just showed it, show don't tell. It just showed how awesome his character was.
Yeah. See, I agree with you, but I think it was a waste of the grifter character, because he was so interesting, but he gets killed almost immediately after you meet him. There's a scene, if you're a storyteller, if you invest energy into developing a character or making a character more interesting, simply to dispatch them almost immediately is very disappointing. It doesn't sit well. So, every time you make a choice when you're telling a story and you draw attention to something, you're basically asking a question that should be answered later. And the question is how, the consideration is how big is the question, because that's how big the answer will be. But if you make things too interesting and then never really follow through on the logic of them, then you just have a series of frustrations.
Right.
And that's my problem with Land of the Dead.
Asia Argento's character is great in that movie too. I mean, she seems it's not really a character that we haven't seen before, but she does it so well. She's like this, tough person, and she's a little vulnerable, but she's also really tough, and she understands that no matter how bad things get, everything's better if you keep a joint hidden in your shoe.
Yeah. That's true. I like too, one of the things that about Riley observing the zombies, he's like, they're learning to be us again. And one of the characters says, well, they're pretending to be alive, and Riley says, well, isn't that what we're doing, pretending to be alive? And I like that, because I thought that kind of summed up the film series thus far. But what do you guys think the subtext in this movie was? I was thinking the whole thing was how everyone that lives in the building, and I forget what it was, Fernwood tonight.
Fiddler's Green. Kind of like, Nero fiddled while Rome burned.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
That's the reference.
Yeah. And everyone's
sort of
pretending.
Cabrini Green too, which was the project. Like it's a bunch of people living in a building, and you're trapped in there, like, even if it's nice.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Cabrini Green becomes Pruitt-Igoe.
But I thought this was sort of the subtext was that it was, the people are pretending everything's fine when it's not. Like you guys said, why does money have any value? I agreed with that 100%. It should have no meaning, but the humans kept clinging to it. So maybe there was a purpose in the storyline for that, to show that people can't wrap their brain around the concept that money's no good anymore. Maybe.
Yeah,
I
mean, it's the end of the world, but how cool is my Cartier tank watch?
Right.
What does that stuff even mean when you don't even have to have money to obtain those items anymore? Like, you can just go take them if you have the ability to dodge all these zombies. You can go and loot a place and steal it. I think it was his way of. I think the movie of the idea of burying your head in the sand. Yeah. And that was sort of a political thing at the time. It reflected the politics of the time, which has only gotten more and more pronounced in the years since then. You know, it's the idea of being able to pretend, being in a fortunate enough that you're in a position where you really are not affected by all the things that have started to go wrong in the world. And to me,
Well,
that's what Land of the Dead is about.
There was this fantastic, it actually happened. There was this a few years ago during Obama's second term. There were race riots in Baltimore, and Baltimore was on fire. And at the same time, the White House Press Correspondents' Dinner was occurring, which is sort of the hottest ticket in town in Washington, where all the glitterati and elites gather to celebrate themselves. And the Daily Show did a broadcast from there, and they did it as if they were broadcasting from the home district in the Hunger Games, right? In the Hunger Games, the home district is populated by all the obscenely wealthy people who insist that the members of the other districts kill one another for their pleasure, for their entertainment. And, you know, that felt to me kind of spot on. It's like there's this terrible unrest 60 miles from where you're living, and you're having like a Rockefeller-esque gala, you know.
Yeah, that's funny. I just one last thing about this movie I wanted to touch upon was I liked John Leguizamo's character, but I felt like they could have done more with him. You know, he was wanting to get into Fiddler's Green. He was thinking, well, if I do this and do that and do this for the boss, I'm going to get me a place in there. And because that was the whole thing, is everybody wanted to get in there. And obviously, you know, he wasn't the sort of people that they wanted in there. And
you learned that still wasn't how it works.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
The zombie apocalypse.
But I always like John Leguizamo.
We have standards.
Well, there's still room for racism, I guess, was the message there. It's like you can't root that out even in the most desperate times. There's still going to be that element. Not even racism, just a classism.
Okay. Yeah.
Any kind of sort of division between human beings, that's still going to be there.
Right.
There is a wonderful metaphor near the end. During one of the scenes in Fiddler's Green, they show a bird in a cage, right, chirping away happily.
Yeah.
And when the zombies set upon all of the, it's like that scene in Mask of the Red Death where the Red Death executes all of the rich partygoers. When the zombies start dining on all the rich, there's a close up of the canary or the parakeet in the cage, and it's mechanized. It's a robot.
It's a robot,
real. Right? to illustrate, the phoniness of this life that they think is great. Which that begs the question too. And now I'm going to dive too deep into the film. I'm probably going to think too hard about it. But so these people are survivors. They're wealthy. That's why Dennis Hopper wants them. He wants their money. But how are they generating any more money? After a while, their money's going to run out. Like, where do the banks? They can't access the banks anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
And, it's one of those things you just have to go with.
Right.
Because at that point, there would be a barter society.
Exactly. You might not be able to see the way a system like that would work until it happens, but they would find a way. Because, the very wealthy people, like the 1%, the people we think of as the 1%, I mean, they're not strangers. They know who each other are, they know each other, and they know what their assets are. They're very familiar with one another. So in a circumstance like that, their credit would be good.
Yeah.
I read a news article about what, to borrow another phrase, what Goldman Sachs recently termed the plutonomy, which is a super rich quasi-oligarchy that's often in charge of many important things in our society. And there was I don't know what you call it. It wasn't a TED Talk. Maybe it was a TED Talk for the super rich at one of these gatherings like Aspen or Davos. And the discussion was, well, if the apocalypse hits and we're living in our lavishly appointed escape houses or safety compounds. How do we make sure that our servants won't murder us?
Oh,
Literally, that's what it was
wow.
about, you know? So you're right, money, who cares? It would have to be a barter system that you'd have to have cornered the market on something essential like medicine or food
Right.
Or
to,
actually have a skill, some kind
yeah.
of skill that would be valuable.
I
Right.
have a friend who's an eye surgeon who's also really good at sewing things. And I said, if the apocalypse hits, you're going to be fine because you're a doctor who can sew, you know?
That's hilarious. So I guess us AV guys will be out of business because there's no electricity.
Well, you never know. It could be battery operated.
Oh, there you go. So I know, Jim, you kind of mentioned sort of that, as an audience member and a Romero fan, people should see this. Bill, what's your final thought, and would you recommend this?
Yeah, this is the last one that I would recommend. Actually, I thought Land of the Dead was disappointing, and then came Diary and Survival. So it sort of made me reevaluate Land and be like, maybe that wasn't so bad after all. So yeah, I would recommend Land.
Oh, that's funny. And speaking of Diary of the Dead, we're going to talk about that next. It came out in 2007, and the plot is taking place during the initial outbreak of a zombie pandemic. Diary of the Dead follows a band of film students and their teacher making a horror movie that decides to record the events in I'm sorry. Diary of the Dead follows a band of film students and their teacher who are making a horror movie that decide to record the events in documentary style as they themselves are chased down by zombies. This went direct to video. First of all, let me just say, I hate found footage films. I hated Cloverfield because I thought it was a great premise, but I got car sick in that. I hated Blair Witch. I got car sick in that movie. But I will say that when I watched this for the first time, there were only a couple of moments where I started to feel queasy, but I felt that if you're going to watch a found footage film, even though it's not a great film, this is the one to watch because Romero knows when to put the camera down, when to cut to a security camera that's static and not moving. It doesn't have that whole, like Cloverfield, the whole movie was this. Blair Witch, the whole movie's this. And I'm like,
You had to take Dramamine before you went into the theater.
Which I didn't realize that there was another movie. It was called Next Stop Wonderland, which is not a horror movie, but it was shot in Boston. So we went and saw it because of that. And this was long before Blair Witch Project. And I'm like halfway through the movie, I'm getting sick. And I got up and I had to go put cold water on my face. I'm like, why do I feel like I'm car sick? And I didn't realize, I think, until the next movie that it was the shaky cam that was doing it for me. But I feel that one of the strengths of this movie is that Romero knows when to put the camera down. Do you guys agree or disagree?
Agree.
Well, you mentioned Cloverfield and Blair Witch. I think those are probably two of the found footage films that I really enjoyed. And you're not wrong about the shaky cam and the way it's, because I saw both of them theatrically, and that was an overwhelming experience to be in it, watching on the big screen something that's shaky. But I think both of those movies worked really well, especially Blair Witch. That's one of the by the time that came out, I was already a hardened horror fan, and nothing could scare me anymore. But that really freaked me out, that movie, because I think people that aren't afraid when they're watching Blair Witch have never actually been in the forest in the middle of the night or in the woods.
Yep.
When it's dark and
Yep.
you don't really have you're not as confident as you are when the sun's up. So but yeah, Diary, it was very Romero knew how to get the grounded camera work out of that format of the found footage, and so that was welcome. I admit I'm not crazy about the shaky cam.
Yeah.
I really liked the fact that found footage is a way to emphasize the postmodern era, fragmented reality, multiple apparent narratives. And Romero doubles down on that because there's a plot and then there's the movie plot. So it's a plot within a plot, which is finally realized in the final scene in which the now zombified would-be zombie mummy is chasing around the damsel in distress.
Right.
And this I really like, and the character, the filmmaker character, actually looks like a kid version of George Romero. And the girlfriend who resents his never turning the camera off finally realizes that he's, giving a narrative to chaos, and that in doing this, he's doing the world a service. And because nobody knows what to believe, the world is helter-skelter because the laws of nature don't seem to apply. And so that made the film for me really entertaining, even if some of the characters weren't that interesting. And there were some zombie kills in this which were just out of this world, like the zombie clown at the kid's birthday party.
Yeah.
That was outstanding. That, and when the main character finally gets home and her little brother is a zombie and attacks her, and the film professor nails him to the wall with the bow and arrow. That was pretty sweet too. That's the fact they're willing to go there with a zombie kid and they just nail him to the wall.
Well, my wife and I watched it the other day, and I screamed out loud when the kid jumped out of there. But
and when they put the sulfuric acid on the zombie's head and it gradually eats away to his brain and then he dies, that was pretty sweet too.
That was well done. When I first watched this, when it came out, I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was terrible. Like I said, I was pleasantly surprised that I was able to watch it and not need Dramamine. But we watched it again recently, I don't think it was like 2 days ago, I liked it a lot better than I did the first time around. And I think because this time around, I went in expecting it to not be good, and it was better than I remembered it. But also like I found this online where it says Diary of the Dead identifies filmmaking and other forms of communication as the source of the cultural infection, underscored by the continual pun on the word shoot. Like Maxwell, he uses the handgun to kill a student to become a zombie, and then he just hands the weapons over to this other kid and says it's too easy to shoot, and he of course switches to the bow and arrow. But I liked that as the subtext of the movie, that it was like we're dying, but yet we're still recording everything, in this day and age of technology. I thought I got a little bit more out of it. I felt the subtext was a little bit stronger, even though by the end I did kind of feel like Romero was hitting me over the head with a hammer. He could have backed off on it. Bill?
Yeah, I think that's mostly accurate. George Romero always had a message in his films, even the worst ones, which I'll go unmentioned. But yeah,
I'm not sure there was a message in Creepshow though. But he just directed that. I don't think he wrote that. So
no, Stephen King wrote that.
Yeah.
It was Creepshow was a total homage to EC Comics, and they're other than the very blunt moral messages that were in the EC Comics stories, and that was the only driving subtext behind Creepshow, if there was any. It was just like these shrewd people getting their comeuppance. So that one doesn't
except poor old Jordy Verrill. He didn't deserve it. The lonesome death of Jordy Verrill. Meteor shit.
Yeah, but he was so dumb. The message was if
that's a wonderfully American concept. It's like you're so dumb that you're morally culpable.
Sure, yeah.
Oh man, but yeah, I guess I probably wouldn't recommend this one. But if someone asked me if I liked it, I liked it. Especially I liked it more the second time around. I do find lately, like a lot of movies that I've revisited that maybe I didn't like in the past, I find something a little bit more redeeming in them, or I even like them when I didn't like them. But yeah, I thought the professor character was the best character in this movie, which is weird because when I first watched it, I don't know, somewhere along the way, I got it in my head that Sean Pertwee played that guy, and it wasn't him at all. I was expecting him. I don't know if you guys know him. He's the son of John Pertwee, who was the third Doctor Who, and he played Alfred in
Gotham.
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 Awesome in that movie.
And he was also in Event Horizon. He was one of the crew members of the ship.
And what's the military werewolf movie? Blood Soldiers?
Dog Soldiers.
Dog Soldiers, yeah. He's in that. He's awesome in that one.
Is he in that?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. I didn't even
But he wasn't in this. It was Scott Wentworth. But I liked his character, especially when he takes the bow as his weapon of choice. I like little touches like that, little character affectations.
Well, in him, you see the educated intellectual watching the crumbling of civilization and sort of, experiencing it, the horror of it on many different levels, and the helplessness he feels. And he doesn't want to have to kill anything, but, he's not so self-hating that he'll just give up. But I think he's drunk throughout the entire story.
And his character had been in the military.
Yeah, I mean, in the safe room, don't they have like 20-year-old scotch? He's like, "Oh, I'll stay in the safe room." At the end, in the rich kid's house.
All right, here's something I didn't understand. They get to that house. They get into the anteroom before the safe room, like the library, if you will. Why not just take all your supplies, maybe some buckets or something, and toilet paper, and barricade yourself in that room? And you have the safe room as a fallback, because the safe room is literally almost like a vault. It's like you could at least barricade that. And then if you had to, you go in, and they go into the safe room and they don't even bother to take any books in. It's like, well, what are you going to do for the next 15 years now? You'd be bored out of your mind.
Haven't you seen that Geico commercial about people in horror movies making bad decisions?
Why do we take that?
Plus, if they had gone into the cellar in Night of the Living Dead, they would have all survived, because as we learned, the zombies couldn't get in there after all.
Right. That's true. Of course, it didn't help Ben at all.
No, it was people that killed him, human beings.
So final thoughts.
Some people might say that he was born dead in the United States because of his status and his race. So in some ways, he was a zombie himself, not because he was a zombie, but because other people saw him as a zombie. And so it's okay to kill him and add him to the pile, because he was never a human being to begin with.
Interesting. And, you guys reminded me of something I meant to say when we talked about Night of the Living Dead, which was a buddy of mine back in the early 90s. We were talking about the movie, and he said what he would have done, which I think is a brilliant idea, is he would have taken all the supplies up to the second floor and then ripped out the stairs.
Out, yeah.
Yeah, and then just hole up on the second floor. I'm like, brilliant. And then there'd be no movie, but
something bad could have still happened. There could have been fire in the house, okay? Yeah. And then what would you have done?
That's true. Oh, they could have just piled up on each other like in World War Z.
Maybe. Maybe they could have. Maybe there was a rope they could have climbed up.
Intestines, like in Dead Alive.
And then they could be like the cops in Resident Evil Apocalypse, who are just sitting on the roof of the police station taking out zombies, targets of opportunity.
Right.
Until the Nemesis Project takes them out.
All right. So, final thoughts on Diary of the Dead. Anyone? Would you recommend?
I know I saw it, but most of the stuff you guys talked about in this podcast, I don't remember. So it sort of just, is a dim, distant memory for me. And I don't know. I kind of want to keep it that way.
It's my favorite after Night and Dawn.
Really?
I really think it connects on a bunch of different levels that, and it's, even though it sort of recycles the plots in some ways, it's one of those ones. I like the fact that they're on the road, that they're not confined to one place. I think that adds a lot of value. They're sort of roving through the apocalypse. Isn't there a scene where they go and they find this this Quaker or this Amish farmer who can't speak, and he communicates with them with a chalkboard or something, and
he's
they
deaf.
find
Yeah,
all these zombies in the barn or something. Just there are all these bizarre vignettes. It's like a road movie, zombie movie.
yeah,
They have an awesome RV. I love an RV movie. So
Yeah.
there's that.
All they needed was Warren Oates and Peter Fonda. One thing I forgot to mention too about this movie is that it takes place pretty much around the same time as Night does, even though they were made decades apart. You're supposed to pretend, because they use audio clips from Night of the Living Dead of the newscasters talking about what's going on.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a nice little touch.
Yeah, I like that about his movies. They don't necessarily contradict one another, even though they're anachronistic, but you can sort of overlook that. Each one is its own little slice of that scenario. I like that about his zombie films.
I think this is a good popcorn movie. I think, if you got a bunch of friends over, throw it on. I think if you've seen it, you don't necessarily have to see it again. But I liked it. Like I said, I liked it a lot better the second time around. I think, again, walking into this kind of movie, the first time my expectations were a lot higher, and I was a little concerned about it being just a shaky cam, found footage kind of thing. So let's move on to Survival of the Dead from 2009, the sixth and final Romero film. Taking place shortly after the events of Diary of the Dead, the film follows the actions of former Colonel and current Sergeant Nicotine Crockett, who, after a failed raid, deserts his post with Kenny, Francisco, and Tomboy, and finds the existence of an island run by two warring families. Does anyone besides me like this movie? No.
Crickets chirping.
Well, let me dive into it then.
Jim, do you like it? I mean, you liked Diary, so
yeah. I rewatched this again. I didn't care for it. Diary and Survival, I didn't care for the first times I watched them. This one, I walked away liking it a little bit better than the first time. I felt that the zombies were still kind of scary in this. One thing I liked about it was I like seeing stories about different types of people in different settings and how they try to survive the zombie apocalypse. Like, I often wonder, well, what was going on over here? What was going on over there while Night of the Living Dead was taking place? I like the fact that he tied in the soldier character, Nicotine, there from the previous movie, who basically shows up for one scene and robs them all of lets them keep their guns, but he takes all their food and everything. Again, the zombies were starting to get smart here. So that was a recycled concept that I think they could have evolved it a little bit more. They could have made it maybe almost like the next level of the zombies instead of sort of keeping it. But it's sort of set still at the beginning of the outbreak. You had a little bit of Western in there. I think Romero I don't think he ever actually made a full-on Western, but
it was like Hatfields and McCoys kind of. It was like a clannish feud or a tribal feud.
Right.
And it's like, are all the people that live on Plum Island Irish or something?
I know.
Still really Irish?
I don't mind the old guys being Irish, but the young kids were Irish too, with the accent.
No, that just seemed utterly incongruous and unnecessary.
Yeah.
It didn't add any value.
I almost wonder if that was just to show how long they had been there on that island, those two families, which at that point they would have been really inbred. So that was a problem I had with the movie, that they didn't portray them that way.
The best part is when they show the two kids, the one kid who's was hit by a car and his brain is leaking out of the side of his head, and his sister who's dead because he bit her, and they're chained in their bassinets or something.
Yeah,
that was in some ways that was the only redeeming part of this movie. So
I like the fact that, of course, I forgot to look the actor's name up, but the guy who played Death on Supernatural was one of O'Flynn's, supporters, one of his men. I felt the subtext of this was the stupidity of feuds, and it also had that whole thing about people wanting to keep their loved ones, and that was what this particular feud was about, where the other guy felt that they could keep them chained up. They could keep, they didn't have to kill the zombies, and they could train them to eat animals instead of people, which again is sort of a recycled concept from Day of the Dead. And, I wish he had set this later in the zombie apocalypse so we could have seen an advancement of that as well. Because by the end of the movie, the zombie chick ends up eating the horse, but none of the main characters get to see this because her sister is about to tell her and she gets shot in the head, or is about to tell the main characters and she gets shot in the head. So they're left wondering with the soldier character, Nicotine, who's narrated the beginning and he's narrating the end, and he's saying, yeah, we don't know if we can ever train these zombies to do something different and to not eat us, but maybe we'll see. It was like,
yeah. For me, this movie was very much an exploration of the I Am Legend thing again. Only this time there was a character in I Am Legend who shows up maybe about halfway through the film, and she appears to be a normal person, but ultimately you realize that she's not. She's one of the zombies or vampires or whatever you want to call them in that story. But she's not like the other ones. She's not quite like the other ones. She's sort of like halfway in between both of them. And I thought that was what this movie seemed like it was going for, sort of expanding on that idea that ultimately they could be working towards, like, even though you're dead and you're a zombie, there could be some semblance of life that you could return to some kind of normalcy. A return to normalcy is what these people are looking for in all of the films. Like, they just want everything to go back to the way it was before this horrible thing happened to the world. That's probably the strongest thing that survival has going for it, in my opinion.
I agree. Jim, you were going to say something?
Well, it reminds me a little bit of, there was this really great horror story in Vault of Horror, EC Comics, illustrated by Johnny Craig, maybe 50, I don't know, mid 50s. Well, early mid 50s. And this guy is living in Haiti, I guess. And he has this beautiful wife, and she dies from malaria. I don't know. So the Haitians bring her back to life as a zombie. And he's so happy. Then she begins to rot and follows him everywhere. And finally, he has to kill himself to get away from her. And of course, what do? They resurrect him, and they're like the perfect couple again. And all I can think of is, like, do you really want these, they call them stenches in Land of the Dead, these hideous, stinking, decomposing, hideous, people around? That just strikes me as absurd. Even if you're like, crazy attached to your family members, after a while it's like, good God, the smell alone, the putrefaction, there's a point at which, I'm sorry, I love you, but it's like dealing with a disagreeable family member. You only have so much patience, and then goodbye.
There's a great, speaking of TED Talks, you mentioned that earlier. There's a great one by Jaron Lanier about what it means to be a person. And
I think he wrote a book about that.
Yeah, it was just his concept. I mean, like, listening to him really opened my mind to that idea, like what goes into the elements that make a person. And that's sort of what Romero is getting at in this movie too, I think, is like, could there be a line, like, is there any hope that these people have? They're hanging on to these dead loved ones. Like, what is what they're hoping for? Could that happen? And what actually makes you a human being and a person? And is it possible to even have that again when you're a zombie? It's right. It's kind of ludicrous on its face, but it is an interesting concept. So
you could flip the zombie personhood thing and turn it into a rumination on abortion rights. Well, it's not quite a person, but it's still sort of alive. It's alive, so maybe we should just not pull the trigger, right? So
that's digging real deep for this movie. But I see your point. So aside from assuming someone is a a Romero completist. Would you guys recommend this at all?
Only for a Romero completist. Basically, it's like a movie that exists best in memes.
Yeah.
Like there are a handful of scenes that could be turned into GIFs or memes. I did like the zombie woman on the horse. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like Lady Godiva the zombie, except she's not naked, and But otherwise, it's just like no, like there's a scene where you meet the soldiers and the female soldier is prominently masturbating.
Yeah.
Like while they're on patrol, it's like what?
Right.
It's just like out of nowhere, and it's never explained. It's like it almost feels like, hey, you want to see if she'll do that in the scene? I bet you she won't. I bet you she will. It's like it's just crassly exploitative.
No, it's the end of the world, man. You never know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, that's true. It's like that. It's like the old argument. It's like, who is it? Henry Zabrowski, the comedian who does Last Podcast on the Left, made the observation. It's like, well, the plane's going down, so you proposition the person next to you for whatever sexual gratification you're seeking, right? Because who cares? You're going to die in a plane crash.
Right. Oh, man. Yeah, the effects weren't too bad in this movie, although there was one at the very beginning where someone gets his head blown off, and it was so obviously computer generated, like to the point where his head gets blown off, but the top of it stays like in a cartoon and then falls and lands on what's left of the neck. And I was like, oh, really? Is that how we're going to start this movie?
Yeah, like I'm gonna bungle the quote from Roger Ebert, I'm sure, but he said that stop motion movies looked fake but felt real, and computer generated special effects look real but feel fake.
I've used that quote many times on the show. I agree 100%.
Like the shotgun suicide scene in Species 2, where the guy blows his head off and then it reconstructs itself, but it looks so fake.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Even I still think that is the apex of that film. So, in terms of otherwise forgettable but amusing as hell,
Yeah. I feel this movie. Well, I don't hate this movie, but it's a missed opportunity. I think he could have really set it further into the future of the zombie apocalypse and advanced a lot of the concepts that he'd already laid out, rather than just retread them. And then I almost think he retreaded it, like the zombies learning and the zombies just finally being able to eat animals, to have that shock downer ending where the girl gets shot before she can tell everybody that her sister was eating the horse, her zombie sister. So yeah, I actually wouldn't recommend this to anyone unless, like we said, you're a Romero completist, because there's a lot more better zombie knockoff.
Also, what does it say about Romero, assuming that was his message, that he thinks that undead people have more dignity and rights than animals,
Yeah.
Well, maybe he just thought it was.
Let's have him eat this beautiful horse.
It's a better alternative to eating us, to killing people.
Right.
Arguably.
That was the point. And that kind of does go against what Frankenstein was doing in Day of the Dead by rewarding the zombie with human flesh, which I suppose they didn't really have any animals they could have used at that base anyways. But, because they were trying to get him to eat a pig before too, earlier in survival.
And the pigs are smarter than the zombies.
Well, that underground mine in Day of the Dead was full of records. So if they could have gotten them to eat paper instead of human beings, then they would have had something.
There you go, make some mush. All right, so we've covered all 6 films. I real quickly just want to touch on a couple of the remakes. Night of the Living Dead, directed by Tom Savini from 1990. I saw this in the movie theater. Did you guys see it? Have you seen it at all?
I saw it theatrically.
Did you guys like it?
Patricia Tallman.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, she is. I like what he did with the character of Barbara in it. That's the thing everybody remarks on, is how Barbara becomes sort of like this. She does a U-turn, her personality. She starts the movie off like Barbara in the original film, but then the situation sort of galvanizes her, and she becomes self-sufficient. That was interesting. It doesn't, again, like, why would you remake Night of the Living Dead? Like there's no reason to remake it, but since it was lucrative, and that, I was going to ask you, Roger, if that was a George Romero zombie movie too, because even if he didn't direct it, he produced it. So
that's true. Yeah. I forgot
Maybe
that.
this is his, I'm sorry, maybe this was his way of reclaiming his lost earnings on the original.
And it was also a way of reclaiming the copyright too, in some respect.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he said. It was just because, he could kind of take it back.
Yeah. I kind of forgotten about including this in the 6, just because my brain just works that way. It's, night, dawn, day, land, diary, survival. I like, to me, remake. Oh, that goes outside the Venn diagram. But yeah, I really, really like this movie. I saw it when it first came out. I think I bought it on Laserdisc when it came out. And it introduced it. It put Tony Todd on the map. I mean, he was great in that.
And this was how 2 years or 3 years before Candyman?
I believe so.
I think it came after Candyman.
Oh, did it? Oh, then
it was at least contemporary. Was Candyman 89?
No, Candyman was like 93, I think.
So I guess it did come first. Everything's a little fuzzy. Yeah, Candyman's 92. So sorry. I'm past the age of 50 now, so I remember things differently.
Welcome to the club, man. But yeah, do we want to talk about it a little bit? I'm open to that if you guys are.
Sure, yeah.
So give us some opinion, Bill.
Well, you mean the remake of Night of the Living Dead?
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's really well done. It's not embarrassing. The zombie effects, of course, are really great in it. The characters are a little cliche. Tom Towles is in it, and I wasn't crazy about what they did with Harry Cooper in the movie, because it was just kind of like really over the top, I thought. But again, maybe they weren't going for utter realism. It was a movie after all. So yeah, I like what they did with the remake. But again, you couldn't touch the original. That's the funny thing about all the very concept of a remake is rarely can you make a remake relevant. Like when John Carpenter did The Thing, even though today we look back on that as a classic, at the time it was reviled and nobody liked The Thing when it came out. But it did gain its own ground. And the remake of Night of the Living Dead has sort of been reevaluated recently, not on the same level as The Thing, but it's gained a lot of popularity as the years have gone by. But it's hard to recapture lightning in a bottle. You can't. And that's what Night of the Living Dead was, the original. So in that regard, they didn't have a chance of recapturing that element of it. But I thought what they did was pretty good.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Jim?
I don't remember it well enough intelligently to comment on it, other than my impression of Patricia Tallman. And I think there was a scene where she's fleeing the cemetery where her brother's been killed. And there is a zombie following her, and he's wearing one of those casket suits, and the back is totally revealed so you can see his butt. Because that was fantastic.
It was hot.
But otherwise, I thought this wasn't a necrophilia podcast, but anyway.
Anything to get ratings. It's a ratings grab.
Yeah. But otherwise, I don't remember it. I remember there's a scene where Patricia Tallman is wandering through a cemetery among the dead. That was pretty cool. But otherwise, I don't remember it. And I agree that remaking something like Night of the Living Dead is, why? I mean, it's sort of like when Ted Turner colorized Casablanca. It's like, what?
Oh, God.
Really? It's like,
Blasphemy.
it's like that scene in the 1989 Batman where the Joker goes through the art museum and defaces all these magnificent works of art.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to avoid being the vandal when you take a classic and try to remake it or reconfigure it. So you're playing with fire.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Instead of lightning in a bottle, you're playing with fire.
Right. You know, yeah, it didn't capture that magic, but I think as a it's a decent zombie movie. It's a solid, horror movie. I like this one. I should actually revisit it. It's one of those films I saw so many times. I actually still remember quite a bit of the dialogue. I almost don't have to watch it again. But yeah, there was no way it was gonna eclipse the first one in any way, shape, or form. It just didn't have that impact. It didn't, the first one came at a time and changed the way things had been done up to that point. And when this came out, we'd already seen this kind of movie before, so it wasn't anything special.
All those classic horror films that really changed, aside from the old Universal monster movies, there came a time in the late 60s and the early 70s where these movies started to really shock us, like Night. Then there was Alien was another one, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those were all about a loss of innocence that we had in terms of what they showed us in the films and the places that they took us, the bodily disruption and dismemberment, mutilation. You can't get that back. Once you've lost that innocence, it's really hard to find something that's going to make you feel like that again. And that's sort of the problem, with people keep trying to go back and like do it again. And really, you have to find a different way to grab people. And at the time it was different, but now it's not.
I think there's still a movie, and it's one of the greatest horror movies ever made, that should not be remade, that dissipated your innocence, but without any bloodletting at all. And that was Todd Browning's Freaks.
I knew you were going to say that.
Which is really one of the most disturbing horror films ever made. I would say it is as disturbing as Texas Chainsaw Massacre and everything that, Night of the Living Dead. It's extraordinarily disturbing.
Yeah, it's got that meta element because those weren't monsters. They were people. They were real people.
Yeah, I can't. I saw it once when I was younger, and I can never watch Freaks again. It just disturbed the heck out of me.
It's sort of like I Spit on Your Grave. It's a film that is, in some ways, it's the greatest feminist film ever made, but you can't bear to watch it again, because it's so horrifying.
Yeah, it's like you got to go and boil yourself after you watch the movie. Oh, man. I did have something I was going to say, and I forgot what it was now. If I remember correctly, Dave Cronenberg played the brother Johnny in the remake.
Really?
No.
Was he?
David Cronenberg?
Yeah.
No, I mean that would be news to me.
I know he played the sadistic bioresearcher in Jason X, which is pretty cool.
Let me see.
They're remaking Dead Ringers, by the way.
You know who it was? It was Bill Moseley was Johnny in the remake.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
I think for years I always thought that was Dave Cronenberg. Well, I didn't remember correctly.
No, that's Bill Moseley.
Wow.
I love Bill Moseley. Bill Moseley, you'll love this. I went to a boarding school in New England, and one of the other boarding schools I applied to is this famous school called the Hotchkiss School. It's about 45 minutes outside of New York City. It's very shishi. They have Andy Warhol Mao prints and Gucci. I think Gucci leather chairs in the library.
Wow.
And he went there, and then he went to Yale. And all I could think of is like the evil member of the family in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And like, oh, I went to Hotchkiss and Yale. It's just fantastic.
With my Sonny Bono wig.
That's all right. Lloyd Kaufman, the guy behind Trauma, also went to Yale. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Horror luminaries are smart people.
Oh yeah.
If you get a chance too, if you look up Bill Moseley, I forget what soap opera he was on, but there's clips of him on an old soap opera like Days of Our Lives or something. He only has like a bit part in it, but it's just funny to watch him, in his early days. I tried to get him on the show, by the way. I don't have enough subscribers for him. So when I grow the show bigger, he'll come on the show.
Fair enough, I suppose.
I guess, yeah. So, all right, let's jump over to the Dawn of the Dead remake from 2004, directed by Zack Snyder. Um, let's go with Bill first, because I know, Jim, you kind of have a strong opinion on this.
It's disposable. I liked it a lot the first time I saw it. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and I think its greatest strength is that it hardly ever lets up. It's got that fantastic opening, which is really intense. I really thought that was amazing, but maybe like in the middle section, it sort of loses its way. But ultimately, it's just sort of like meaningless. Like we've seen this movie before. It doesn't even have the social context that the original Dawn of the Dead had. All of those things that Romero said in that movie have been said over and over again since then. So there wasn't much left for the remake of Dawn of the Dead to do. It didn't bring anything new to the table as far as I'm concerned.
Jim?
I found it entertaining. I agree about the intro. I guess my only variation on that would be when she's at the hospital. I think that it would have been more cool to have her like working on some patient and he comes back to life and eats the doctor or something, but when the neighbor's kid comes in and she's a zombie, that was pretty sweet. And driving through the chaos. No, I agree. That was really excellent. I also really liked the zombie baby and the game they played with the gun store guy where they'd hold up a sign, shoot the zombie that resembles this celebrity, and they'd shoot that guy. That was while they're playing that sort of easy listening version of The Sickness by Disturbed. That scene was a work of genius. So
I love that. Also during that movie was every time it seemed like they went out to confront this horde, this unimaginable horde of zombies, they wore tank tops.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like I'd go out there at least in a leather jacket and leather pants or something. Not that I have a thing for leather or anything. Something that would protect your skin.
No, they only had a whole mall and a sporting goods store to avail themselves of.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I remember when it first came out, I was a little concerned. I'm not really a big fan of remakes. But I enjoyed it. I actually did see it in the theater. I feel like same thing with Night. There was really no need to remake this movie. It's like, why don't you take a really bad movie and make it good instead of taking a really good movie and making it maybe not so good?
You have to have something new to bring to the table. And that movie, really, I think the best thing that it did, it was scary. It was very well, there was a lot of suspense in it, which I loved.
Yeah.
Because it's not all about the gore. But it also did the one benefit that they had with the computer generated effects was that scene where they drive the vehicle out into the middle of this sea of zombies. That was really scary, I thought, because and that's something that Romero couldn't have done, or I don't know who could have done that at the time of the original Dawn of the Dead. So that was something new that they brought to the table that was pretty scary,
right,
in my opinion.
And the zombies being fast, as much as I was opposed to it when I first saw it, that did change the game a little bit, made them scarier, because you walk into the movie thinking, oh, they can just run past these guys. No.
Yeah. What else are you gonna do? You have to do something to make the movie scarier. So
the only thing, and I don't want to say it makes me angry, but it really irritates me about a movie like Dawn of the Dead, the remake, is that it's well made, it's well crafted. It's not the original Dawn of the Dead. And that's what irritates me, because I feel like the kids today are going to see it and think that this is the original. They're not going to know it's a remake of another movie until you tell them. And so it kind of irritates me that it blocks that original movie, that, it's, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's just, I just almost wish they just hadn't done it. You know what I mean? Just because now there's something between the original and movies moving forward. They're like, oh, this is the original, you know.
Just because
Well,
we like, go ahead,
well,
Jim.
I remember something. I studied classics, Latin literature when I was in college, and I remember one of my professors made this observation, and it's always stayed with me. He said that there were competing stories, variations of the Greek myths. And I think that there's something to that, that in order for something to prosper and endure and to live, you have to adapt to, ongoing reality, new generations. So,
Yeah.
I grew up with the Roger Moore James Bond more than the Sean Connery. And later in life, I grew to love the Sean Connery, but first I really loved Roger Moore, and a lot of people hate Roger Moore. But I think I prefer to see it as sort of a gateway to the original. If you really like this, well, check out the original, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say, because modern generations aren't going to think the original was good, because it's to them it would be a crudely made, cheesy movie, because they're not going to relate to it the same. Just because we liked it doesn't mean they're going to like it. So a remake in that regard isn't always a terrible idea.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. Interesting. We touched upon also the Day of the Dead remake. Has anyone seen this? I have not.
No.
Are you talking about the new television series that's
Not
coming out, or are you
It was
talking
a remake around 2007 or something?
Yeah, the one with Mina Suvari and Ving Rhames.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, it's got some really good scenes in it, but including a zombified Ving Rhames, which is a lot of fun.
Is he the same character from the Dawn remake?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh no, I don't think he's the same character.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
But I don't like what happens is that the town is. I think that they do the same thing that Robert Rodriguez does in Planet Terror, in which the zombies are almost like a hive mind. They transform simultaneously and start wiping everybody out. And that is less interesting to me, because it's like you're bitten and there's a gradual decline until you become a zombie, which is a lot more interesting. Actually, no, they do have that. One of the soldiers in the movie protects his friends even as he's zombifying and even after he's zombified. But I seem to recall there's a scene in the hospital in which all these people go zombie at the same time. Maybe I'm conflating the two, but it is an entertaining movie to watch, and I recommend it. So
Hope to check it out. Something I was going to say, I forgot what it was. So apparently there is going to be a 7th film in the series. It is going to be called Twilight of the Dead. Romero's widow, Suzanne, is pushing to get it made. I think she may be producing it. Apparently he's got like 40 or 50 scripts that he wrote that were never produced, and she wants to slowly get them made into films.
40 or 50 scripts for the same film?
No. Separate stories. So she wants.
What about the Marvel Comics stuff that he did? Is there any talk of turning that into a movie?
That I don't know. I know that exists. I don't know anything about that. But I guess apparently in the 2010s, he was a little dissatisfied with the last 2 movies, Diary and Survival. And so he wrote a treatment with his co-writer, Paolo Zolati, which depicted sort of a conclusion to the series that explains the fate of the zombie protagonist from Land of the Dead, which would have been interesting. And he wrote the beginning of the script, but the project was stalled when he died of lung cancer in 2017. But it was announced in April of this year, 2021, that the film had been put back into development under the supervision of Suzanne Romero, with Zolati finishing the script with screenwriters Joe Netter and Robert L. Lucas. Suzanne told The Hollywood Reporter, "This is the film he wanted to make, and while someone else will carry the torch as the director, it's very much a George A. Romero film." So if they pull it off, I'm willing to at least give it a shot.
Oh yeah,
I'll go see it.
Yeah. There's another one too coming out that I talked to Judith ODay about briefly, and it's called Night. I can't talk. It's late. Night of the Living Dead. I think it's called Genesis, and it's interesting. I actually don't want to say too much because she told me not to say what I was actually going to say on the show, but she's involved in it somehow, and it could be interesting. So I think we should look out for that.
Isn't there a Resident Evil Genesis, or am I misremembering?
It's Terminator Genesis. I don't know about.
Yeah, that's right.
Speaking of Resident Evil, George Romero was supposed to direct the first Resident Evil film. There's so many films that George Romero was attached to in the planning stages, and one of them was Resident Evil. He was going to make that movie, and he was also the first director that was signed on to do Salem's Lot.
Wow!
The one that in
David
'79.
Soul? Yeah,
they got the plug pulled on that. Well, not really, but it just so happened that there were a whole bunch of other zombie movie or vampire movies that were coming out theatrically, like John Badham's Dracula and Werner Herzog's remake of Nosferatu. So they decided to make Salem's Lot a TV miniseries, and that's when George backed out, because he was like, again, he was like, no, I can't make a movie that doesn't have graphic violence, I guess is what he was looking for. So he bailed on that.
I actually, just as an aside, I think that many of the best horror films don't have any graphic violence. Like, say,
I agree.
Yeah,
I mean, that scene where the kid protagonist, like his friend who's been turned into a vampire, comes to his window and scratched, open the window.
Yeah.
Oh my
God.
God.
Oh my God. That's one of the scariest things I've ever seen. And it's never not scary.
Of course, Tobe Hooper made that film.
Yeah.
The director of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is another film that really does not have a lot of graphic violence in it. And you walk away from it thinking you've seen things that you haven't really seen.
Oh yeah, that's the brilliance of that movie.
Yeah.
Well,
there's a gruesome film, but there's not a lot of over the top graphic violence in it.
What was that John Wayne film about the PT boat operators in the Philippines? It came out in like during World War II, and
it's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah, Donna Reed is in it, and she plays his love interest and a nurse. No, that's a comedy that came out in like the 50s or 60s. Right. And there's this wonderful scene where Donna Reed is assisting a doctor helping a soldier who's been horribly wounded, and you never see the wounds. You only see the expression on her face. It's like the scene in and somebody pointed this out to me when I saw it for the first time, Double Indemnity. The best, most horrific part of that movie is when Fred McMurray is strangling Barbara Stanwyck's husband in the backseat of the car. You don't see that. You only see her smiling in the front seat. And it's so chilling. It's so effective. No blood, nothing. It's just, it's so horrifying.
Yeah, there's nothing that can be as scary as what you make up in your mind.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's wrap this up, guys. Thank you for joining me today. This was an amazing show. We've gone for probably almost 3 hours now, and I think it was great fun. I'm glad you guys joined me and talked about these Romero films, and it all started with Night of the Living Dead in '68, and it's had this lasting effect on cinema to this day. So, Bill, why don't you tell the audience where they can find you and what you got going on and everything?
Well, I've had my hands in a lot of stuff lately. I'm still publishing Drive-In Asylum, which this is our last issue that came out, issue number 23. We had Candace Hillegas from Carnival of Souls was in it, and also Giovanni Lombardo Radici, the Italian actor who got his head drilled through in Gates of Hell, speaking of Gates of Hell. And underground filmmaker John Morichugu did an interview with us. The next issue is going to feature Pat Carty from Horror High. He's going to be one of the cover features. So that's going to come out either at the end of this month or early November. Also, tune into the live broadcast on Facebook Live. Saturday nights at 8 is our usual time slot. And follow my Facebook page, Groovy Doom. I'm really into vintage newsprint ads. That's kind of what I do. I just did an episode of your podcast, Then Is Now, the audio version instead of this video version we're doing tonight. And I talk a lot about it on there, so I won't repeat myself. But follow Groovy Doom on Facebook for info about the live broadcast too.
Excellent, excellent. Jim?
Like you said, I just published a book or my publisher published the book in February called The Disgusting Supermarket of Death. And it's 22 short stories of varying types of horror, some of it crime, some of it sci-fi, most of it's just straight on horror. And it's an homage to, in many ways, my love of the original EC comics from the 1950s. The ironic or O. Henry ending, and I tried very hard to be short, sweet, and pungent with each of these. Most of the stories are 2,000 words roughly, and they hit and then move on to the next. And I think that horror fans will love them. Even if they don't love all of them, they'll find something in there to love. Before that, last year, I had my publisher, Marcosia, terrific publisher and based in England, published the graphic novel I co-authored called Stay Alive, which is about a down on her luck Hollywood actress who stars in a reality show about trying to survive the attempts of a bunch of murderers to kill her. And she tries to survive this while she's on a reality TV show called Stay Alive. I also, it's been well received, and I think for gore and for horror fans, I think you'll love it. I also I just recorded a Haven podcast with you about Dead Heat, Rigor. I don't know when it's going to drop, but it's part of your 13 days of zombies.
Yeah.
For which this is the apogee.
Yeah. At this point, it will have been released when people hear this show that we did today.
Okay, great. And Dead Heat is a fantastic zombie horror comedy from the late 80s starring Treat Williams and Joe Piscopo. And it's sort of the gonzo end of zombie horror films that, it doesn't take itself seriously, and it ends up being just a lot of fun. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. On Twitter, it's at NovelStay, capital N and capital S. And on Instagram, it's Stay Alive GN. And there's also there's a lot of content out there that I've done, either interviews I've given to podcasters, or the Simply Scary podcast produced a story I wrote back in 2018 called Making Things Click. And that's season 3, episode 5. And it's about this kid who posts a video online of himself, apparently murdering his high school bully. And he creates a social media trend and a viral trend of people murdering bullies, which quickly metastasizes into people murdering other people that displease them, like the homeless. So I tend to try as much as possible to fuse horror and comedy, because horror unadorned by comedy is usually just too much. So, but I encourage people, and I'm gratified whenever anyone reads and enjoys my stuff, because being able to connect with other people like we did tonight, it's great. It makes the world more tolerable and lovely in my case. So thank you very much. I greatly appreciate this opportunity and meeting you. So
Awesome. And was Operation Pacific the John Wayne film? where he's on the sub?
That might have been it. No,
Oh.
no, not on a sub. PT boats.
Yeah, it was.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure that was it.
Okay.
Well, guys, I just want to thank you again for joining me on this awesome podcast. It was such a lively discussion. I thought we really dived deep into Romero and what he was trying to put forth. I will put all of your links in the show notes so people can find you guys and purchase your awesome books. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on this year's 13 Days of Hallowtober. Don't forget to check out our website at havenpodcast.com and spread the word about Then Is Now Podcast. Class dismissed.